at the mercy of the elements. The world is such that accidents can happen anywhere. Even the simplest, most routine situation can turn disastrous. We take risks every day, yet naively believe we control everything. Some people intentionally invite risk into their lives. For some, it becomes a constant pursuit tied to their professional activities, while others occasionally seek a thrill. Extreme hobbies like skydiving, rock climbing, caving, parkour, and more fall into this category. Diving is also on the list of dangerous pastimes. The desire to explore the ocean depths is understandable. Water and its inhabitants have always attracted both researchers and ordinary people. The vastness of the water space, far larger than land, adds to its intrigue. Diving is one of the most popular activities, but it's not the safest. Many things can go wrong. Oxygen deprivation, barotrauma, encounters with dangerous animals or strong currents, and more. The most unexpected thing can happen. You could be forgotten during an underwater excursion. What may seem like a joke at first is actually a reality. The story of the Lonergan family is a tragic confirmation of this. Though the events occurred back in 1998, and many safety protocols have since been implemented to prevent such occurrences, this story still chills to the bone. Imagine the horror experienced by the two spouses left alone at sea. A quarter of a century has passed since then, yet many continue to debate what really happened to the couple. Was their disappearance the result of tragic negligence or a deliberate decision to end their lives? Let's try to figure this out together. The long-awaited dive. On January 25, 1998, Thomas and Eileen Lonergan left their hostel in the Australian town of Cairns. Leaving the northeastern part of Queensland behind, the young couple headed further north to Port Douglas. Their goal, a long-anticipated dive into the waters of the Great Barrier Reef. The world's largest coral reef system had long been a magnet for avid divers. At the designated location, the 33-year-old man and 28-year-old woman boarded the boat Outer Edge, along with other like-minded individuals. A total of 13 pairs set out that day to St. Crispin's Reef. The one-day excursion, costing around $100, was full of promise. The package included 3 dives in a picturesque and safe location, all under the supervision of an experienced crew. It's worth noting that the company providing underwater tourism services was considered one of the best and had years of experience, so travelers could pursue their dreams with peace of mind. The weather on January 25th was ideal for the tourists. By all accounts, it was a perfect day for scuba diving. The water at the dive site was pleasantly warm. From the start, the couple declined the services of guide Catherine Traverso, relying on their extensive experience. The Lonergans had completed 160 dives in their lifetime and were considered seasoned divers. The boat's passengers donned their gear and jumped into the coral sea. The diversity of flora and fauna was stunning. The Great Barrier Reef is home to around 1,500 species of fish and 400 types of coral. When the dive time was up, a signal sounded from the boat, clearly audible underwater, indicating it was time to surface. Afterward, everyone emerged and returned to the vessel. Around 3 p.m., the protagonists of this story took their third dive, descending to a depth of 39 feet. The underwater tour was coming to an end, and time flew by unnoticed. Within an hour, everyone was back on board. According to the crew, a head count was conducted, and the number of divers matched the original count, 26 people. That evening, the Outer Edge arrived in Port Douglas, but not all the divers disembarked. It turned out several tourists were missing. However, what was more horrifying was that no one had noticed this. The same applied to the 2 bags that remained on board. To this day, it's unclear how the crew miscounted the passengers and failed to notice the belongings left behind. One way or another, the missing individuals were Thomas and Eileen Lonergan, together forever. Thomas and Eileen met while studying at Louisiana State University, where Eileen was learning the basics of scuba diving. They instantly liked each other and began dating. The couple was deeply in love and inseparable. They went camping, swam in the ocean, and attended parties together. Their relationship was admired by many and seemed ideal. Some even envied their genuine love. No matter what they did it together. Eileen had a great passion for diving. She spoke about it with such enthusiasm that Thomas couldn't resist and soon shared his beloved's interest. Over time, the young couple earned their certification in this field. Eventually, on June 24, 1988, they sealed their union in marriage. The wedding took place in Jefferson, Texas. Since both were born and raised in Louisiana and had never traveled abroad, they dreamed of seeing the world. Thomas and Eileen were also known for their kindness and compassion, so when they were offered the opportunity to join the Peace Corps, they eagerly agreed. The Lonergans were perfect candidates for this role. During their student years, they participated in numerous charity projects and events, offering help to those in need. The Peace Corps, an independent U.S. government agency, sends volunteers to assist struggling countries, promoting friendship and peace worldwide. After a successful internship in Tuvalu, a country in Polynesia, the couple moved on to Fiji, where they taught children from impoverished families. At the time of these events, they had been married for 10 years. By then, they had completed their mission and were planning to return to the U.S. However, the Lonergans had one more wish: a world cruise. They wanted to visit famous places and take in the local beauty. Their return home was scheduled for March 1999, but first, they had a long and exciting journey ahead: the Great Barrier Reef. As avid divers, the couple had long dreamed of seeing the wonders of the Great Barrier Reef. This is why they ended up in Australia. The local attraction is renowned worldwide. Did you know it's the largest coral reef system on the planet? Created by marine organisms, it's a truly unique natural marvel. Its area surpasses the size of some countries and is even visible from space. The Lonergans wanted to capture this wonder in their memories forever, knowing it might not last. You can't imagine how Thomas and Eileen saw it back in 1998. Today, much of the ecosystem has vanished. Once vibrant and diverse, the corals have become bleached. While not dead, they are at high risk of disappearing forever if they become diseased or are exposed to destructive external forces. Even a slight rise in water temperature can cause this. For optimal coral growth, water temperatures need to be between 72 and 81 degrees Fahrenheit. The beauty of the Great Barrier Reef can still be enjoyed today, but in the face of the greenhouse effect, its days are numbered. A significant coral bleaching event occurred in 1997 to 1998, which is why our couple was in such a hurry. They rushed to see the reef while it was still alive, only to encounter death instead. Criminal negligence. Based on general knowledge and film scenarios, we can imagine the scene that unfolded before the couple after they surfaced. An endless sea stretched around them, with no sign of the only symbol of safety: the outer edge boat. Two young people, without food or water, were left alone amidst the vast ocean. Surrounding them were threats in the form of dangerous sharks, the blazing sun, and the risk of dehydration. The desperate divers could only hope that their disappearance would be noticed and that they would be rescued in time. After all, according to the rules, the number of people on board must be counted multiple times, before the dive and after. Even if a miscount occurred, records should be made upon surfacing about the dive depth, air levels in the tanks, and so on. In short, the required documentation should have been kept. In the end, even if none of this had been done, the Lonergans' personal belongings remained on board, which surely couldn't have gone unnoticed. Initially, the couple likely thought it was a funny mistake, something they would laugh about later when telling their friends. But as the hours passed, nothing changed. Two at sea. The realization of the inevitable came slowly. No one wants to believe in the worst until the very end. Over time, the forgotten couple began to assess their situation more clearly. In reality, Thomas and Eileen could do nothing. There was no one in sight, and calling for help was pointless. Swimming to shore was equally impossible. There were no islands nearby. Despite being experienced divers, it was unrealistic to cover the 60-mile distance to land. Adding to their fears was the fact that Australia is home to the largest and most vicious sharks in the world. It wouldn't take much for these predators to attack the stranded tourists and deal with them. The couple had no tools to defend themselves from this looming threat. Nor did they have any water or food with them. It is known that the average life expectancy without water is 2 to 4 days. For some, this period may stretch a few extra days. While a person can survive much longer without food, water is essential. Without it, dehydration sets in after 5 to 7 days. How long a person can endure without sustenance depends on their health, body mass, willpower, and the climate. Regardless, death under these conditions is slow and agonizing. On top of that, they faced scorching heat, increasing the likelihood of sunstroke or heat exhaustion. The only two comforting thoughts at that moment were these. First, they were not alone in this situation, but together, as they had always been. Second, as divers, they were unlikely to drown. Their gear included buoyancy compensators, which are much more reliable than life jackets. The next danger they faced came in the form of strong winds and powerful currents. They were being carried farther and farther away. Even if someone began searching for them after a while, they would no longer be in the same location. The most tragic aspect, however, was that there were pontoons just 1.5 to 2 miles away. These floating platforms, anchored to the ocean floor, provide a place to rest. Had the Lonergans known about this, things could have been very different. They could have waited for help in relative safety, resting, and even sleeping. But alas, a different fate awaited them. The couple was being swept into open waters, farther from any chance of rescue. With about 5 hours left until sunset, night, the most dangerous time, was approaching. For when everything sleeps, the sea comes alive. A chance at rescue. At this time, the 24 passengers of the Outer Edge and the crew had all disembarked. The exhausted tourists headed to their hotel rooms, and the boat's crew returned home to their families. No one gave a thought to anything being wrong. No one cared about the belongings left aboard. Everyone was simply tired after a busy day and eager for rest. The next day brought no significant changes. However, there was one moment that should have drawn attention. Another group of divers visited the Great Barrier Reef. The familiar boat pulled up to its usual spot, and the tourists descended into the water. Upon resurfacing, one of them told a crew member that they had noticed diving weights on the ocean floor. These weights, part of a diver's equipment, are used to counteract buoyancy. Most likely, the discovered gear belonged to Thomas and Eileen, who had detached them. But the crew member didn't take the information seriously, chalking it up as an interesting find. Yet such items don't simply lie around on the ocean floor for no reason. The negligent worker should have treated the discovery with the attention and caution it deserved. Unfortunately, another mistake and act of negligence occurred. Had an alarm been raised, perhaps the search for the missing couple would have started sooner, and they might have survived. The cruel irony of fate, waiting for help and fighting for your life while people and a boat are not far away. Sadly, this is often the case. Life and death walk side by side. 2 days later. On January 27th, during the cleaning of the boat, someone finally noticed the forgotten belongings. Curious to find out who they belonged to, the bag was opened, revealing dry clothes, a wallet, and documents in the names of Thomas and Eileen Lonergan. The crew remembered seeing the couple 2 days prior. During that time, no one had come to claim the items, which was quite strange. This is when things started to become clear. The skipper who made the discovery immediately reported everything to the police. The investigation began right away. Everyone understood the gravity of 2 tourists disappearing. Law enforcement officers checked the missing couple's hotel room. Unsurprisingly, there were no guests inside. The hotel staff confirmed they had seen the couple before their trip on Sunday morning. After that, they never returned. However, no one had raised any alarms since the room had been prepaid, and it was assumed their excursion could have lasted several days. Tension mounted. The police interviewed the Outer Edge crew as well as all the passengers from the past few days. It became apparent that no one had seen Thomas and Eileen for quite some time. Moreover, no one could recall if they had even come ashore. Each tourist had been busy with their own activities. The crew insisted that they had counted everyone before heading to shore, but perhaps they had counted the same couple twice. However, some tourists pointed out they hadn't noticed any counting at all, at least not out loud. The discovery of the weight belt was also mentioned. The search. Things were looking bad. To organize a large-scale search, the police called for triple reinforcements. 17 planes and 2 helicopters were dispatched. The Coast Guard, several private boats, and concerned citizens all joined the search effort. The area where the tourists had been left was scoured thoroughly. Over time, the search zone shifted. In 2 days, the current had carried the couple far away. Throughout all of this, Port Douglas was in an uproar. Everyone was shocked by the incident, holding out hope for a positive outcome. However, many understood that the chances of rescue after such a long period of inactivity were slim to none. The company that had organized the excursion realized the gravity of the situation and prepared to bear responsibility. The boat's crew knew they had been outrageously careless and negligent. Nothing could justify it. The large-scale search lasted 5 days. Continuing beyond that seemed pointless. By this time, anything could have happened to the couple. In the end, they could have died from dehydration or been attacked. The evidence. Supporting this, on February 5, 1998, a buoyancy compensator washed ashore near Indian Head, more than 100 miles north of Port Douglas. It was found to contain a tag with the name Thomas Lonergan. Interestingly, no bite marks from predators were found on it. This is when the case of the couple's disappearance became more convoluted. Shortly after, Eileen's wetsuit and a second buoyancy compensator presumed to be hers were also found. The wetsuit had cuts on it, leading some to suspect they were caused by shark teeth. However, if that had been the case, it's unlikely that anything would have been left of the suit. Later, forensic experts determined the tears were caused by coral. The wetsuit had even accumulated barnacles, indicating it had been in the water for quite some time. Forensic specialists suggested the wetsuit had been submerged since January 26th, the day after the described events. It's possible that, under the scorching sun and heat, combined with a lack of water, Eileen began experiencing delirium, causing her to remove her suit, which would have compromised her ability to stay afloat. Later, diving weights and oxygen tanks were found, some still containing air. However, none of the discovered items provided evidence of death caused by marine predators. What was clear was that the couple didn't have enough time for anyone to find them alive. On February 14th, the search for the missing couple was officially called off. 3 weeks is more than enough time for human bodies to be entirely consumed by the open ocean. According to all biological and anatomical principles, the Lonergans couldn't have survived unless they had been picked up by another boat. But if that were the case, they would have made contact. The last message. 6 months later, a diving slate belonging to the couple was found 160 miles from where the tourists had disappeared. This specialized slate is used for underwater communication and note-taking. Thanks to it, we now know how long Thomas and Eileen remained alive. On one side of the slate, the message read, Monday, January 26, 1998, 8 a.m. To anyone who can help us, we were left behind at Agincourt Reef on January 25, 1998 at 3 p.m. Please help us. Send assistance before we die. SOS! The couple realized they were on the verge of death and used every possible means to save themselves, even the smallest chance. On October 10, 1998, police officer Noel Noonan made an official statement. Authorities believed that the missing man and woman likely passed away between 8 a.m. on January 26th and February 2nd. Most likely, their death resulted from dehydration or drowning. After being exposed to the hot sun for an extended period without water, they became exhausted and disoriented. The divers voluntarily shed their heavy gear, which had been keeping them afloat. One thing was clear in this situation. They were unlikely to have been eaten. The couple's family members were devastated by the loss. Their deaths seemed senseless and avoidable. Thomas and Eileen were young, with their whole lives ahead of them. But the crew's negligence proved fatal. A professional company, which had maintained a good reputation for years, failed to follow basic safety protocols. Justice. When it came time to face justice, Jeffrey Nairn, captain of the Outer Edge, stood trial for manslaughter. He was responsible for ensuring safety on board. The defendant swore that he had instructed one of the crew members to perform a head count after the final dive, but the crew member made an unforgivable mistake. Allegedly, 2 tourists were counted twice because they had gone for a swim after surfacing. Thanks to the defense's efforts, the Australian Supreme Court acquitted the boat captain in 1999. The defense attorney presented entries from the couple's diaries, which suggested they had grown weary of life, having seen and experienced everything, and wanted to depart voluntarily while they were still young. The relatives of the missing couple argued that Thomas had likely been in a depressed state when he wrote those entries, but that didn't mean he would have taken such a drastic step. Moreover, the couple would never have put others at risk of legal trouble. They were members of the Peace Corps, known for their compassion and sense of responsibility. It was also revealed that Thomas's words had been taken out of context, but the case was not reopened on those grounds. As for the diving company, it suffered an inevitable collapse. Its reputation could not be restored. Following the court's ruling, a massive fine was imposed on the company. The financial burden was too great, and the management declared bankruptcy. Was this justice? One way or another, the beautiful couple could never be brought back. They had been left to face a horrific death in open waters. To this day, their bodies have not been found. Version 1. Perhaps the court's verdict was influenced by the speculation surrounding the missing couple. By the end of 1998, unexpected theories about what had happened began to surface in the media. It started to seem as if the tragic story had a secret motive, or perhaps the press was simply trying to create that illusion. One of the most popular theories was that it was a voluntary departure from life. The idea was that one spouse deprived the other of life, and then ended his own. This theory was seemingly supported by the personal diaries of the Lonergans. The claim was that their deaths were not due to negligence, but were part of a carefully planned act by Thomas and Eileen. In support of this, personal writings were cited. 6 months before the event, Thomas wrote, "Like a student who has passed an exam, I think my life is wonderful and I'm ready to die. From what I can tell, my life can only go downhill from here. I've reached my peak and everything is going down." Eileen's thoughts were no less alarming. It was believed that she knew of her husband's desires and was willing to share them. A few weeks before the underwater excursion to the Great Barrier Reef, she wrote, "Tom wants to die a sharp and clear death, and he wants it to happen soon. He's not prone to ending his own life, but he has the desire to die, and I can support him in that." The theory suggests that the couple may have chosen this unusual method because both loved diving. There was something almost mystical about the idea of dying in a place where coral reefs were slowly dying as well. However, the couple's relatives didn't agree with this version. They were convinced that Thomas and Eileen wanted to live, which is why they had planned a vacation after their long mission. In addition, they had recently talked about having children. While they hadn't rushed into parenthood before, they had come to the realization that life would be more joyful with a child. They wanted to continue their family line and pass down their knowledge. It also came to light that journalists had used the couple's diary entries without regard for context, presenting speculation as fact. The spouse's words were twisted and misinterpreted. Version 2. Others believed that the Lonergans' deaths were staged. American researchers Hugh Merchan and Audrey Lindock, who investigated the case, supported this theory. They believed that Thomas and Eileen intended for their diary entries to be found and published. After all, how else would they have ended up in the media? It was revealed that the couple had financial problems that could have resulted in long prison sentences. The theory is that the couple never intended to return home after their trip, choosing instead to escape punishment. It is possible they were picked up by another boat, which had been hired for this purpose. Additionally, there were reports from people claiming to have seen the missing couple. Given the story's notoriety, their faces were recognizable to many. Over the years, police received multiple reports from eyewitnesses who said they had seen the Lonergans alive and well. However, after investigation, these reports turned out to be false. Some were not taken seriously at all. It was also established that since their disappearance, the couple's bank accounts had remained untouched, despite containing substantial sums of money. Sad conclusion. Officially, Thomas and Eileen are still considered missing. Their story served as the basis for the film Open Water, made in 2003 by a married couple who spent about $120,000 bringing the real-life events to the screen. The film helps viewers understand what the couple may have felt in such a dire situation. Each viewer can put themselves in their shoes and feel the helplessness that a person experiences when faced with the elements and predatory animals. The film touches on human negligence in many ways. Even in the final scenes, when fishermen find a scuba camera inside a shark's stomach belonging to the couple, the focus is on their indifference. One of them says, "I wonder if this thing works." Yet no one questions how it got there or what happened to its owner. Just as the crew of The Outer Edge had been careless with their duties, failing to notice the couple's personal belongings left behind. If everyone had done their job properly, the tragedy could have been avoided. Despite the different theories, it's most likely that Thomas and Eileen met their end. They were doomed to a slow and agonizing death. The only positive outcome of this entire situation was the tightening of safety measures in diving operations and the mandatory name-by-name headcount of divers on boats. Terrible consequences, a monstrous lesson. No matter what the past experience was, new relationships are a clean slate. They offer fresh emotions and stir excitement. One has every chance to succeed where they might have failed in a previous union. However, emerging infatuation not only carries romance, but sometimes also big problems. When choosing a life partner, you surely do not know what baggage they carry behind them. It happens that along with newfound feelings, you inadvertently take on burdens that should have been avoided. An example of this can be the so-called love triangle, known for its sharply defined angles. Horrific discovery. On October 5th, 2017, on the waterfront of the suburb of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA, law enforcement officers discovered the body of a man. The found body was wrapped in a tarpaulin, strapped with belts on both sides. This grim discovery was located at the bottom of a trash container of a local supermarket. During the autopsy, it was determined that the victim had received multiple blunt force hits and knife wounds. Apparently, the man had been beaten over a long period. During the assault, the unfortunate man had his jaw broken and teeth knocked out, some of which ended up in his respiratory tract. Most of the bones in the face and head were broken. Only on the skull were 6 wounds inflicted by a blunt object noted. Additionally, 6 knife wounds were found on the neck, 7 in the throat area, and several more in the upper part of the chest. The injuries were so severe that in some places the flesh was cut through. Ultimately, the medical examiners concluded that death was due to head trauma, blood loss, and suffocation. The identity of the deceased was beyond doubt, further confirmed by the victim's brother. On the pathologist's table lay 39-year-old Nicholas Wilcox from Putnam, Connecticut. What events led this young man to such a tragic end, and whether his tormentors were punished, we will learn in today's criminal story. Introduction to the main characters. In the subsequent investigation of Nick's demise, several individuals were suspected: his girlfriend Isabella Tagliarini and her former boyfriend Eric Robinson. Both were also his neighbors in the duplex where our story's protagonist had moved. The house is designed for 2 families and features separate rooms, each with its own yard and entrance, a popular type of property in Florida. Initially, Robinson, who had first rented the place, sublet the vacant units. 38-year-old Isabella was the first person he invited over. She was from Brazil, where she worked as a flight attendant for a national airline. In 2010, Tagliarini divorced and immigrated to the U.S. with her children. She successfully married an American, which helped her secure the coveted green card. The marriage lasted until 2016, but over time, their passionate feelings faded, leading to their separation. That same year, the young woman began dating 46-year-old Eric Robinson. Her new partner was from a small town in Massachusetts, had never been married, and had no children. A romantic relationship quickly developed between them, though it was periodically turbulent. The passionate nature of Isabella and Eric's accustomed bachelor lifestyle contributed to this. Moreover, according to the woman, he was inconsistent in showing his feelings. He could be cheerful and friendly, then suddenly become gloomy and aggressive. For this reason, the couple broke up and got back together multiple times. In June 2017, shortly before Nicholas moved in, the lovers had separated again. Wilcox had known the couple for about 6 months and maintained contact with them. When he mentioned wanting to save on rent, Robinson offered him to move in and share the expenses. Initially, the neighbors had a wonderful relationship. They respected each other's personal space, yet often spent time together. However, over time, this neighborly idyll was disrupted and problems began. As it turned out, Robinson was using and storing banned substances, which explained his erratic behavior and mood swings. On August 23, 2017, the man was detained. Shortly before this, he had reconciled with Isabella and was actually in a relationship with her at the time of his arrest. By then, Nicholas had already been living with them under the same roof. After Eric's detention, none of the tenants knew when the main renter would return, nor what their future held. It was possible they could be evicted at any time. Therefore, they immersed themselves in work to have a financial safety net in case of emergency. Fortunately for Nick, there was plenty of work, which was not the case for Isabella. The woman struggled to find suitable employment, so she began helping her neighbor in the construction business. The life story of Nicholas. It's worth noting that several generations of the Wilcox family engaged in similar activities. Nicholas's grandfather was a fisherman and built boats, and his father also dedicated his life to construction. Later, the main character joined the family business, becoming a roofer after graduating from school in 1996. Along with his older brother Donald, they acted as contractors, building their own client base. At the age of 23, Nick started a family. The young man tied his life to a girl named Kathy, who was his classmate in his senior year. A year later, the couple had a daughter, and 3 years after that, twins. Throughout this time, the family head worked diligently, striving to provide a decent living for his loved ones. Friends and acquaintances of Nick recalled that despite his busy schedule, he was a devoted husband and father. Yet he devoted a lot of time to his professional pursuits. Perhaps this was the reason for the family's eventual dissolution. The divorce occurred shortly after the birth of the younger children. Nonetheless, the father continued to communicate and support his family. A fresh start. At the beginning of 2017, following his brother, Nicholas moved to Florida. The new place promised better job opportunities. Here, the number of clients significantly increased. Additionally, the chosen method of earning became non-seasonal. Almost all year round, the state enjoyed good weather, warm and sunny, which creates excellent conditions not only for living, but also for business development. Moreover, the Wilcox profession came in handy in the new location, where powerful hurricanes regularly swept through the coastal areas. During storm season, homes were damaged and thus needed to be reinforced and repaired after the bad weather. Leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas continued to care for his children from a distance. According to an agreement with his ex-wife, he sent them money and visited whenever possible. Initially, the man stayed in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale. However, he later had to move to the suburbs to reduce his housing expenses. Irma. It was during this time that life brought him together with Isabella Tagliarini. The hurricane season had started, so Nick was inundated with daily orders. At that time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where the hero lived and worked. It turned into a powerful Atlantic tropical cyclone of Category 5, with wind speeds of about 177 miles per hour. An emergency was declared before its arrival. About 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. Nicholas spent all his time preparing buildings for the impending assault of the elements. He reinforced homes, boarded up windows and doors, and afterward was involved in clearing the resulting debris. Of course, all this was his main job, so he was paid for it, but he could not be called mercenary. In an interview, the man's older brother confessed that Nick never refused to help. One September day in 2017, as all of Florida was preparing for the terrible cyclone, Nicholas was busy boarding up windows with plywood. Soon there was a sharp shortage in stores, creating long lines. In one of these lines, a woman named Pamela approached Nick. She told him that she lacked building materials to fortify her home. In response, the younger Wilcox promised to solve this problem, and that same evening brought her the 7 missing sheets of plywood. He boarded up all the doors and windows of the woman's house and refused payment, even though he spent an entire day finding the necessary supplies. Nick was moved by Pamela's difficult life situation. She was left alone with children and needed outside help. In response, the woman thanked her rescuer. Heated romance. The hurricane brought widespread destruction, providing Nick with work for a long time. As a result, he decided to make his duplex neighbor his assistant. Isabella's duties included cleaning up after the projects were completed and handing tools during the work. As the young people spent a lot of time together, their friendly relations evolved into a romantic relationship. On September 3rd, the couple made a peculiar vow, written in blood and on paper, which served as a sort of engagement and a promise for a long and happy life filled with lots of children. Despite the strong feelings that enveloped the lovers, their union could not be called perfect. Almost immediately, minor issues and disagreements began. Arguments arose out of nowhere. On September 22nd, a serious conflict occurred between Nicholas and Isabella. The woman even left home and spent the night in a hotel. However, the next morning, the couple reconciled. According to Tagliarini, she lacked attention and respect from the man. He, on the other hand, thought she was exaggerating. Ultimately, their love led to inevitable consequences. The message. On October 5th, 2017, a man called the local police. During the conversation, he introduced himself as Isabella's former husband and asked the law enforcement officers to contact her. According to his words, she had information about a recent crime. The caller did not provide any more details. Despite the strangeness of the call, the police immediately responded to the message and called Tagliarini. From her voice, it was clear that the woman was hysterical. When asked by the police what had happened, she replied that everything was fine. The only thing that concerned her at that moment was a fight with her beloved man. She explained that he had left her and driven off in an unknown direction. However, when the police mentioned the call from her former husband, she immediately changed her tone. The woman began to cry and confessed that her beloved had not gone anywhere, but was dead. She also added that she knew where the body was located and was ready to show it. Crime scene. Law enforcement arrived at the address provided by Isabella. The officers were met with a house, all of whose windows and doors were boarded up with plywood, apparently in preparation for the approaching hurricane. Inside, there was a strong smell of cleaning agents and paint, indicating that the place had been thoroughly cleaned. In one of the bedrooms, detectives noticed the walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, likely in an attempt to cover something up rather than for a routine renovation. Their suspicions were confirmed by the discovery of hydrogen peroxide containers. Small blood stains were found on the bedding and the bedside table. It was also evident that someone had replaced the old mattress. Despite efforts to eliminate and paint over them, blood stains were everywhere. The police suspected that the room had been the site of a violent crime, which Tagliarini had tried to clean up but hadn't completed in time, thanks to her ex-husband's timely call. Isabella was found inside the duplex, appearing distressed. During the conversation, she explained her state by saying she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call, which accounted for her unusual behavior. However, she confirmed knowing what had happened there and where the body was located. The unstable woman was decided to be taken to the station. By this time, the police had spoken again with her ex, who provided a partial account of the events. According to him, she had called him and told him about the crime. Initial version. Nevertheless, during the interrogation, the Brazilian woman claimed that Eric Robinson, her former boyfriend, was involved in the crime. On October 5th, around 2 a.m., the man came to the duplex and found the couple asleep. He was enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. He woke Isabella by putting a knife to her throat to prevent her from screaming. At that moment, she looked at Nick lying beside her, who seemed to be struggling to breathe. However, Eric did not allow her to see more and pushed her out of the bedroom. He then took a brass knuckle and a bat and began to beat the defenseless man. After finishing the beating, Robinson wrapped the body in a tarp and secured it with straps. Under the threat of a similar fate, his girlfriend helped him dispose of the body. However, the detectives were puzzled as to why, instead of calling the police, she had called her ex-husband. Isabella explained that she was very frightened and was looking for support and advice. According to her, the criminal also forced her to clean up the residence and eliminate all traces. Afterwards, he returned the phone he had taken earlier and left. Her confession raised doubts and required verification. Additionally, visible bruises and abrasions were noted on Tagliarini's body, which she explained were from being beaten by Eric after Nicholas's death. Investigation. The officers began their investigation by searching for the victim and his assailant. The suspect indicated where her boyfriend was hidden. While the medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement was busy searching for Eric. It was established that the man had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, the criminal had met a new woman named Merida, at whose place he was staying. She told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call after which he immediately left. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and set off again without any explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida explained that she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Robinson was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, and therefore, he was taken into custody pending further investigation. Eric's version. During the interrogation, Eric provided a story that differed from Isabella's version. According to his statement, Tagliarini contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite a restraining order she had received against him immediately after he was sent to prison. Despite this, she told him that she had attacked Nicholas under the influence of banned substances and ended his life. When Isabella came to her senses, she realized she couldn't manage the situation alone and asked for help. In return, the Brazilian woman promised Robinson that they would get back together and start over. As Eric still had strong feelings for her, he agreed to these terms. Fiery Brazilian. Detectives latched onto the man's words, wanting to interview the initial suspect once again. Given the circumstances and her behavior, it was clear that she was holding back information. Most likely, she was trying to minimize her role in the incident. Moreover, the investigation uncovered intriguing information. It turned out the woman was far from innocent and had been on the police radar multiple times. On September 22nd, when Nick and Isabella had a severe argument, it escalated beyond the confines of their room. Under the influence of Xanax and banned substances, she became enraged and destroyed some of her partner's belongings. Unfortunately, she also damaged his work vehicle. Consequently, the angered man felt compelled to contact the police. Moreover, she behaved so irrationally that he genuinely feared for his life. As known, the couple reconciled the following morning, and Nick withdrew his complaint. After this, investigators spoke with the suspect's ex-husband. He described Isabella as having an explosive personality and a fiery temperament. He also learned that during their argument, Wilcox had warned her. He threatened to contact immigration services if such incidents repeated. Nicholas informed her that he would give her a negative reference, which could impact her future significantly. For Tagliarini, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was paramount, so the fear of deportation was catastrophic. Could it be that during another argument, Isabella reacted explosively again and found herself under threat? It was quite plausible that her desire to stay in America could have motivated a subsequent crime. Not wanting to rely solely on existing statements, detectives began interviewing those close to the involved parties. An important witness turned out to be a neighbor of the young couple. Her windows overlooked the courtyard of the duplex. She stated that she saw Robinson arrive in his car on the night of the crime. He then took some tools and trash bags, and shortly thereafter, he got back in his car and left. The investigation continues. With substantial evidence gathered in the case, Tagliarini was called in for another interrogation on October 11th. At that time, the woman had not been arrested, so she came to the station voluntarily. Thanks to video surveillance footage, detectives established that on the fateful night, she personally transported Nick's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this, the Brazilian was neither frightened nor agitated. She acted calmly and methodically, making decisions independently. That night, she indeed met with Eric Robinson, but she was relaxed and friendly. At the same time, no one took her mobile phone, and she purchased the items needed for emergency repairs herself. In response, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella insisted that it was Eric who had threatened her with either murder or deportation along with her children. She claimed that she was forced to act as she did because of these threats. Although her statement sounded plausible, the investigators were cautious with their conclusions. Both Robinson and Tagliarini's backgrounds raised suspicions. Eric also had a turbulent past. He first caught police attention in 2001, mainly for possession and distribution of narcotics. At the same time, Isabella had every reason to fear him. In August 2016, he committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was caught for strangulation, and in the same year, for possession of substances. Neighbors reported being afraid of the man and tried to avoid him due to his aggressive and erratic behavior. The next interrogation of the Brazilian woman took place on October 14th. Despite her claims of not having touched Nick, experts found traces of her DNA on the man's body, thus contradicting her statements. According to the investigation, she participated in the violent crime against her lover, at least in the disposal of the body and the elimination of evidence. However, neither suspect admitted to any wrongdoing. While Robinson was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Everyone was anticipating the start of the court proceedings. However, due to various complications and delays, the trial did not take place until 5 years later. The significant delay was caused by the outbreak of COVID-19 and a series of bureaucratic snags. During this time, the prosecution clearly formed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed all information gathered during the investigation. Additionally, during this period, another significant piece of evidence was uncovered. The prosecution managed to recover Robinson's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime against his former friend. Over these years, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution, admitting guilt to a lesser charge. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to testify against Eric. Sentencing. On April 10, 2023, the trial of Eric Robinson finally took place. The prosecution argued that he was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas. Isabella's role was not presented as that of a co-conspirator, but as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, which is also criminally punishable. Legal complexities caused several hearing cancellations, and the trial resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Robinson was charged with premeditated murder. Despite Tagliarini providing inconsistent testimonies and contradicting herself, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution focused on witness statements that described Eric's unusual actions on the night of the crime. To avoid GPS tracking, the accused used his new girlfriend's car, which was not equipped with satellite tracking, and he also left his mobile phone at home. Meanwhile, other case details were not concealed. It became known that after the crime, Isabella and Eric had an intimate encounter in the next room. She explained her condition by stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives and also feared for her life. After hearing both sides, it became clear that jealousy was the motive for the brutal and senseless murder of Wilcox. While Isabella claimed that she had ended the relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. Upon his release, the accused returned home, but the changes that had occurred in the meantime fueled his rage and hatred. During this period, he plotted revenge against his rival and committed a cold-blooded attack while the couple was most vulnerable in their sleep. His first strike effectively sealed the fate of his former friend. He then attempted to dispose of the evidence by scattering it in various locations. The murder weapon was found in a landfill. The deceased man's body was wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Afterwards, Isabella painted over blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area. Throughout these actions, Eric communicated with Isabella and directed her actions. Eventually, 51-year-old Robinson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for second-degree murder. Isabella Tagliarini was found guilty of aiding the criminal, but threats and coercion were considered mitigating circumstances. She received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Remarkably, the convicted woman was indeed ready to do anything for U.S. citizenship. It was revealed that 10 days after Robinson was incarcerated, the parties signed another pledge. In it, Eric promised to marry Isabella, but he did not manage to do so. She was prepared to marry him shortly after he dealt with her lover. It appears that this unprincipled woman is indifferent about whom she marries. The main thing is to maintain her status. All men Isabella Tagliarini has been involved with were used for her selfish purposes and, in one way or another, were inclined toward marriage. Apparently, for her, nothing is more important than American citizenship, even if it comes at any price. To summarize this story, one might say, opportunity in life isn't singular, but life itself is. Unfortunately, some characters in this tale never realized this, while others did but much too late. Martin Gardner sat on the porch of his desolate home, clutching a photo album he had received years after the tragic day. That album had become a symbol of his loss, a living testament to a terrible tragedy. Martin's gaze stopped at the pictures of his small and innocent children, Talen, Sai, Savi, and Yazi. These pictures were all he had left of his happy days. As he looked into their faces, he could almost hear their children's voices filling this house with laughter and warmth once upon a time. Martin's first child was Talon, who was only 4 years old. To his father, he was the light of his life. The man dreamed of spending all his free time with him, teaching him everything he knew, and drinking beer with him in the future, when Talon would be a real grown man, and Martin himself would be gray and important. Little Saya, who was only 3 years old, always ran to her father when he came home from work, remembering to take her cloth doll with her. She always asked Martin to give her and her doll a kiss before she went to bed. This always brought a smile to her father's face, and he performed this sweet ritual with seriousness and respect. Savi, a 2-year-old girl, was silent and intelligent. She loved to flip through books and watch animal movies. Martin often took her on his lap and read her favorite stories to her. He saw in her the potential of a future intelligent and serious woman who would achieve great heights in life. And Yazi was the youngest, still a very tiny baby with deep black eyes. When Martin looked into her eyes, he saw a vast world there. Those eyes were exactly like those of her mother, Shaninia Gardner. Martin remembered how happy he was that she had given him this beautiful world full of love, comfort, and children's laughter. But that world was shattered one fateful day. Shaninia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, the American state of Tennessee. Little is known about her early years, other than the fact that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who once inhabited the cozy cabins of Madison, Alabama. Shaninia's childhood and youth flowed as routinely as any other girl's. At that time, she was a young brunette with curly hair, slender and beautiful. The girl was always surrounded by loyal friends and displayed bright talents. Shaninia was filled with a true creative spirit. She had a unique gift of composing songs. Music was her passion, and singing was her way of expressing herself. Her vocal abilities caught the attention of the locals, and she became a local celebrity. However, singing was only one of her many hobbies. Shaninia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She looked great in front of the camera and could turn everyday moments into works of art. Despite all these colorful hobbies, inside Shaninia was a woman full of charity who always found time for religion. She often attended church and carefully cared for her family. Everything in Shaninia's life seemed set and promised a bright future. Shaninia was only 14 years old when she met Detrail Clayton. It started with a casual introduction through mutual friends. They immediately found common ground and became friends. By the time they grew up and graduated from high school, their relationship became more serious, and the young people officially became a couple. Shaninia and Detrail spent a lot of time together. Everyone considered them serious and stable young people. However, there were some questionable episodes in their record. Both were seen in minor offenses, such as traffic violations or disorderly conduct on the streets. In 2008, things got more serious. Detrail was accused of assaulting a woman, and although it was done unintentionally, he was facing serious punishment. The guy got lucky, and soon all charges against him were dropped. Shaninia and Detrail did not formalize their relationship, but they lived together. In the same year 2008, the couple had a son, who was named Dallin. Shaninia became a caring mother, not only to him but also to Detrail's 2 children from his previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Detrail's mother, always saw Shaninia not just as a woman in love with her son, but as part of her family. Shaninia was noted for her devotion and care for her children, which made her special in Sonia's eyes. However, the lovers' relationship was not a long one, and little is known about what exactly happened between them. However, even after the breakup, they continued to maintain some distant communication. To Detrail, Shaninia remained a good wife and a caring mother. When Dallin was just 2 years old, Shaninia was involved in a small incident. It was a minor infraction, perhaps a parking ticket or a minor argument of no great importance. It was also insignificant compared to what the future held for her. Marrying Martin Gardner was a new phase in Shaninia's life. Fate had led her to this man who appeared to bring joy and stability to her life. Shaninia, on the other hand, won Martin over with her kindness and love for children. In her eyes, he saw an ocean of feminine tenderness and wisdom. Their story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to start their life together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding was just the beginning of a new phase of their life together. Shortly after the celebration, they had their first child, baby Talon. And in 2014, little Saya was born into the world. Soon, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, came along, making their big family even happier and busier. In total, Martin and Shaninia had 4 children together, as well as 1 child from the young woman's previous relationship. For the young mom, children always came first, and she enjoyed working part-time at the children's hospital. Moreover, she was actively involved in a center that raised funds to help children. It was her calling, and she gratefully dedicated her life to helping those in need on the cusp of a terrible event. Friday, July 1st, 2016. An ordinary day that didn't portend anything out of the ordinary. Around noon, Shaninia was on the phone with her husband, Martin. Her voice was calm, as it usually is. She told her husband that she was going to watch a movie with the kids. There was nothing to indicate that something terrible was going to happen on this ordinary day. And then, at that moment when the spouses were having a quiet conversation, an incomprehensible madness began to happen. Suddenly, Shaninia changed. She took a kitchen knife and went into the living room. There, she attacked her own 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless little girl who couldn't fight back was caught in a terrible trap. Her life was cut short in an instant at the hands of her most loved and closest person. Dallin, the oldest of the children, he was only 7 years old, witnessed this nightmarish scene. A terrible tragedy played out before his eyes, for which he was too young to understand. The boy thought only one thing. He must do something to save his younger brother and sisters. Panicked and desperate, he ran out of the house. Shaninia didn't stop there. The young woman followed her son out of the house, armed with a knife, ready to continue her nightmarish plan. She rushed after Dallin, but the man, terrified and desperate, screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors heard his screams and quickly went outside to see what was going on. They found themselves witnessing a nightmare that did not settle in their nines. Realizing that Dallin was being watched, Shaninia went no further. However, the whole horror was not over yet. Shaninia returned to the house where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went up to the bedroom where the little ones were. It was the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the nightmare didn't waste a second. They quickly called emergency services, asking for help and rescue for little Dallin and his younger siblings. At that moment, none of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. Sheriff's personnel arrived on the scene and were confronted with an eerie scene. Inside the home at 7449 Southern Hill Drive, they found a bloodied Shaninia and her 4 children lying motionless, bereft of life. The sight left everyone in shock. Shaninia sat with her cell phone in her hands. She slowly dialed the number of Martin, her husband. Her voice sounded quiet and cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had unfolded in their lives was the horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and special unit arrived on the scene, it was all over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been the place of the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror lurked in every corner. The investigators had a bloody knife in their possession, silently bearing witness to the gruesome incident. Chaplains arrived to help and were shocked by what had happened, as well as specialists ready to assist Dallin. The horror he had endured required immediate intervention. While the necessary information was gathered and investigations were underway, law enforcement asked residents to stay inside their homes and not go outside. Some did not need this request. They still felt fear and uncertainty. Their home seemed to be the only safe place. A major operation forced sheriff's officials to close off access to the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. As for Shaninia, she was apprehended and taken into custody without bail. Her trial was immediately scheduled for July 5th. Society could not remain indifferent to these horrific events unfolding in the life of Shaninia Gardner. No matter how monstrous she was portrayed, she was a mother and a partner who radiated love, care, and joy, according to Michelle Jamont, her co-worker. Michelle vigorously defended Shaninia on social media, speaking out about the unfairness of the allegations. She also brought up an important aspect, postpartum depression. Cases like this have sparked discussion, and Dr. Joel Reisman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that the killing of children by their own mother is rare and usually accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed out the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, a psychology and postpartum health specialist, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that they are completely different conditions with different symptoms. And while Shaninia's exact condition required further investigation, Dr. Barnes doubted that women in a state of postpartum depression would commit such acts. She leaned toward the idea of psychosis. The investigation in Shaninia Gardner's case was arduous. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, became her defense attorney, but he chose not to comment on the case to the media in the early stages, believing it was too early for such discussions. On July 5, 2016, at the court hearing, Shaninia remained silent, appearing only via video link. Judge Lois Lambert asked her questions, but the young woman did not utter a single word. After the trial, Shaninia was sent to the Mental Health Institute. Shaninia's next of kin came to the courthouse, but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols planned to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. January 2017 brought formal charges against Shaninia on 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and gruesome investigation continued, and the community was left waiting for justice and answers to many questions. The hearing included testimony from Shaninia's loved ones. On that fateful day, Sonia, Detrail's mother, was undoubtedly shocked to learn of the terrible tragedy. She immediately arrived on the scene in a desperate search for her grandson Dowan. Sonia maintained that what had happened had nothing to do with the young woman she had once known. She expressed her belief that something supernatural, perhaps of a diabolical nature, was behind it all. As time passed, however, and the initial shock began to wear off, Sonia began to speculate about possible motives. She speculated that perhaps the young couple was in the process of divorce. For fear of being alone, caring for 5 children, Shaninia might have come to the terrible decision to end it all. But despite these reflections, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shaninia she had once known was far from a person capable of such a horrible act. Detrail, Dowan's father, also refused to believe in Shaninia's guilt. He admitted that although he was never his son's guardian, he was always able to visit him after his relationship with Shaninia ended. But November 2014 was the last time he saw his son. He noticed that each time Shaninia became more and more radical in her actions and decisions. Every attempt he made to contact his son failed, and he was simply not allowed to be involved in his life. But in fact, Shaninia's friends and family had long ago noticed that a completely unexpected upheaval had taken place with her. The young woman began to experience a strange discomfort, but gradually developed into deep anxiety, paranoia, and even worse, panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and many people began to suspect that it might be related to postpartum depression. This came as a real shock to those around her, as Shaninia seemed to be a strong and dependable woman. She had always been the one in control, but now she seemed to have lost her footing. Her sudden change in behavior made many people wonder why this tragic situation happened. The first signs of strange behavior began in March 2015, and none of her friends and family could figure out what was going on. One day, Shaninia left work early and picked up her children. With 5 children in the family car, she headed down an unknown road leading away from their home. At the time, her husband Martin assumed that his wife had gone for a walk and to unwind in some park. This was quite typical of her daily routine. However, as the hours passed, she never returned home. Very disturbed, Martin decided to put out an APB for his wife. At the wheel, with 5 children in the cabin, Shaninia headed east and traveled more than 74 miles separating Memphis from Corinth. But she didn't know anyone here, and she had no apparent reason to go there in particular. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but police never revealed how or why she ended up there. Shallow cuts were found on her neck and one of her wrists. If she was trying to take her own life, her only witnesses were her children, but they were too young to realize what was happening. Shaninia was eventually returned home by authorities, but after that, even more bizarre behavior began. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family. Her husband was shocked, as Shaninia provided no details about who it might be or why, and there were no prior instances of such threats. Also, when Shaninia was with family and friends, she started complaining about her work and workload. She claimed that she felt very bad about it. Soon, she began to claim that some of her co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these abnormalities, Shaninia showed no signs of abuse or violence toward her children or others. The long wait for trial was not an easy one, and it was severely delayed due to the numerous psychiatric evaluations the defendant had to undergo. Added to this came the COVID pandemic, which only added to the length of the trial, longer than anyone expected. In 2021, the non-jury trial finally began. The defense focused its strategy on Shaninia's mental illness argument. The prosecutors acknowledged her said mental illness, but they insisted that the defendant was still capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Finally, a Shelby County Criminal Court judge, James, rejected the defense, and in December 2021, Shaninia Gardner was found guilty of all charges against her. In February 2022, Shaninia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, with her husband Martin also in attendance. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder, as well as 15 years for each additional count of child abuse and neglect. Shaninia will only be able to apply for the possibility of parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. Given the 5 years she spent in prison prior to sentencing, Shaninia will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, when she will be 80 years old. After sentencing, the prosecutor stated that he agreed with the decision because it was consistent with their desire to achieve justice for Martin and his children. In turn, Martin expressed some relief upon learning that Shaninia would never be able to harm any children again. Sonia, Dallin's grandmother, stood among people, including neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers, during an evening vigil at the apartment complex where the family lived. In remembrance of the innocent victims, those who came to say goodbye held red and white candles and prayed several times for the souls of the departed. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church noted that the vigil was the beginning of a healing process for the entire community, because in the end, the only thing in the hands of those present was a desire to support the surviving baby and his father and help them through this difficult moment. Trail did not attend the memorial ceremony. On his behalf, Sonia told the media that he was too overwhelmed with anger to show up for the ceremony. The president and CEO of the children's hospital where Shaninia worked also expressed their condolences on behalf of everyone at the hospital. Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him with funeral arrangements for his 4 children. During the ceremony, while saying a few words about his children and family, Martin showed incredible fortitude and nobility in his words. In his final speech, he emphasized that his home was happy when his children and Shaninia were there, and that this is how it will remain in his memory forever. The Salma Montes case. Why did a young student pay with her life? Our today's story, widely publicized as the Salma Montes case, took place in Mexico just a few years ago. The victim was a young law school student who was guilty of breaking off her engagement to her fiancé, who abused her. For this, the 22-year-old girl paid for her life in the most brutal way, and her executioner, with the support of loved ones, was confident that he would escape punishment. In a wicked irony of fate, Salma studied at the faculty, specializing in crimes against women. Who is Salma Montes? Our current heroine was born in 1996, November 18th, in a small Mexican town, Delicias, located in the state of Chihuahua, in the northern part of the country. The full name given to her at birth is Salma Yajaira Montes Soto. She was the youngest of 2 children in the family and was raised with her older sister Karen. The girl's birth father, whose name was Gabriel, passed away from a heart attack when Salma was barely 4 years old, and her sister was 8 years old. Since then, their mother Soledad raised the children on her own. The woman never married again and devoted herself to her daughters, doing everything to ensure that they did not need anything. Salma grew up a kind, sociable, and responsive girl. She had many friends from an early age. She adored animals and always came to the aid of others at the first call. Those around her characterized her as a petite, smiling brunette with incredibly beautiful eyes and a kind soul. As a child, Salma, playing with her sister, fell off the swing and split her eyebrow, which left her a small scar in the form of a crescent moon, but it did not spoil her attractive appearance, and rather even became a kind of highlight. In adolescence, the girl, like many of her peers, decided to make a few small tattoos, which, as it seemed, reflected her inner world and state of mind. Her mother, although she was a person of conservative views, did not object and prevent her younger daughter's self-expression. She did well in school, although she was not an excellent student. She dreamed of getting a higher education, but knew that her family has no money to pay for expensive university tuition, and therefore made every effort to get a scholarship and study for free. Although not without difficulty, but Salma succeeded, and she became a student at the prestigious National Autonomous University of Mexico. The girl entered the Faculty of Law, choosing a specialization, crimes against women. Roman with a butcher. In 2006, the 20-year-old student met a young man whose name was Kevin Gualberto Pilcaster. The guy was 5 years older than her. He worked as a cook in one of the local catering establishments and dreamed of a career as a restaurateur. It is noteworthy that the young man began his professional career as a butcher, cutting up cattle carcasses in a butcher's shop owned by his family. Kevin was quite nice, good-looking, and courteous. He knew how to make a good impression, and he seemed to Salma to be a good guy. Between them began a friendly communication, which very quickly turned into a romantic relationship. 5-year age difference was not a serious obstacle, and about a year later the couple officially engaged. Members of the Pilcaster family gladly accepted Salma, despite the fact that her family was much more modest in terms of material wealth. They believed that the young beauty has a positive effect on Kevin, who next to her literally glowed with happiness. But there was another reason, which they preferred not to talk about. As it turned out, the guy had attacks of aggression, from which suffered all those who were unlucky to be at that moment near. However, after the engagement, as it seemed to everyone, he became a little more restrained and calm. But Soledad and Karen did not want to be related to the rich chosen Salma. They noticed a change in Salma's behavior, which caused them genuine concern. Since the beginning of their relationship with Kevin, she became withdrawn, often crying, closed in his room, and from the smiling and cheerful leader has not left a trace. At the same time, Salma desperately tried to convince her mother and sister that she was fine. In addition, her face and body were periodically bruised, which she carefully tried to hide, and their origin was not explained in any way, avoiding an answer. When Salma accepted a marriage proposal from her boyfriend, her loved ones were shocked and desperately tried to dissuade her from marrying a guy who abuses her. But the young student, despite everything, was in love with her chosen one and naively believed that everything would change for the better. A scandalous breakup. Time passed, and Kevin became more and more irascible, aggressive, and intemperate. He was jealous of his passport literally to every pillar, forbade her to communicate with fellow students, and in general with any guys, and also demanded that Salma daily reported to him about where she was and with whom she saw. On this ground, the couple constantly quarreled, and the young man often put his fists into action. At the end of March 2019, after another major quarrel, which ended in manhandling, Salma broke off the engagement just a couple of months before the planned wedding. For her fiancé, it turned out to be a terrible blow, but not because he loved the girl, was very worried about it and wanted to fix everything, but because he took the deed of the chosen one as a personal insult. First time, Kevin tried to return the bride, but he did it in an ultimatum and orderly form. When he realized that she did not want to see him anymore, he suddenly changed tactics. He again became courteous and polite, as at the beginning of their relationship, offered the former lover to remain friends and continued to communicate. A couple of weeks after the breakup, the young people finally calmly talked and seemed to have figured everything out. Salma at the time was actively preparing for the defense of the diploma, had an internship, and was too busy studying, and therefore about the conflict with her former fiancé and broken engagement almost did not think. When on May 31st, Salma unexpectedly called Kevin and proposed to meet, she did not think it strange or suspicious, and she agreed. They agreed to see each other that evening in the parking lot outside the local Natural History Museum on the northeast side of town. The guy worked near the place and often left his car there. After school, Salma was given a ride to the building by a close friend of hers named Violet. Since it was Friday night, they said goodbye until Monday, agreeing to go to the library together that day to study. There was a Ford Transit van in the parking lot, which belonged to Kevin's parents and which he himself used as his work vehicle. The young man was supposed to show up any minute, so Salma headed for the car while her friend went home. Salma has not been seen alive since. Disappearance of a student. When Salma did not return home in the evening, her mother and sister sounded the alarm. She always warned her loved ones if she was going to stay out late or spend the night at a friend's house. About the planned meeting with Kevin, Soledad and Karen did not even guess, because Salma, not wanting to upset them, hid it from them. The student's cell phone was turned off, and after several hours of unsuccessful attempts to reach her, her mother and sister began to call her friends, but they could not help. When the relatives contacted Violet, she said that Salma was going to meet her ex-fiancé, and she drove her to the meeting. At this point, the women realized that something terrible had happened, and it was time to sound the alarm. They immediately, right in the middle of the night, went to the police station, where they reported the disappearance of Salma as well as their terrible guesses about what might have happened. Law enforcers took the statement of the concerned women seriously and quickly began searching for the missing student. The first thing was questioned Violet, who last saw Salma. She confirmed that she took her friend to meet her ex-fiancé, and they said goodbye in the parking lot, and a couple of hours later, Salma Montez's phone was turned off and unavailable. Kevin, who was visited by the police in the morning, said he saw his ex-fiancé in the parking lot. They talked for a while and went their separate ways. It was obvious that the guy was not telling us something, but he had nothing to show for it. Less than 24 hours had passed since Salma's disappearance, and there was still hope that she would soon turn up alive and unharmed, and there were no good reasons for detention, searches, and interrogations, so the investigators limited themselves to talking outside the station and collecting testimony. Salma's friends, fellow students, and relatives took an active part in the search for her. They pasted flyers with her photos around the city, created posts on social networks, through which they asked to share any relevant information about Salma's whereabouts. The missing person was described as a petite, skinny brunette with light skin and brown eyes. Among the special features mentioned were her tattoos, 3 hearts on her stomach and musical notes on her right arm, as well as a small scar above her eyebrow. She was carrying a cloth backpack with textbooks, notes, and a student ID card, which she always carried with her. A grisly find on the banks of the canal. On June 7, 2019, a badly disfigured and decomposed human body was found on the bank of a canal miles away from the interstate highway, the appearance of which was literally shocking. The hands were missing, the skin had been stripped off in places, the hair had been burned off, and the face had been mutilated beyond recognition. In addition, all teeth had been removed, and no personal belongings or clothing could be found. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a deep wound in the neck inflicted by the precise blow of a sharp knife. As a result of this action, the carotid artery was damaged, and the girl literally bled to death in a couple of minutes, and all other injuries were inflicted posthumously. Obviously, the perpetrator did everything possible to make the body unrecognizable, either by fingerprints, dental records, or any special features or external data. Experts only agreed that it was a young girl aged 25 years old, and it was immediately suggested that the body belongs to Salma Montez, who disappeared a week ago and whose story was actively replicated in the press. The mother and sister of the girl were invited to the identification, but they could not recognize their relative in the disfigured corpse. The women simply refused to believe that someone could have treated the kind-hearted and sympathetic Salma so cruelly. In order to unambiguously identify the identity of the victim, required an expensive DNA examination. However, the Montez family had no money for such research, so the test was conducted by a state laboratory, whose equipment left much to be desired, and the probability of error or inaccuracy was quite high. Unfortunately, the results of the examination confirmed that the mutilated body found did indeed belong to the missing student. However, the grief-stricken relatives of the girl still refused to believe it, and announced on social networks to raise funds for a second examination in a private laboratory with more accurate and modern equipment. Hundreds of concerned people responded to their request, and the necessary amount of money was collected quickly enough, but, alas, the retest only confirmed the results of the previous one. It was Salma, the only suspect. Relatives and close friends of the deceased in one voice claimed that she had no enemies or ill-wishers, but at the same time, almost all mentioned her troubled relationship with Kevin Pilcaster, with whom she broke off her engagement about a month before her disappearance. Salma's mother and sister claimed that her ex-fiancé abused and beat her, which is why she decided to break up with him. It would seem that this guy should have been the main, if not the only, suspect from the beginning. But until the body was identified, he remained at large and his house, car, and personal belongings were not searched, which gave him a great opportunity to get rid of the evidence. Only 2 weeks after Salma's disappearance, and a week after the discovery of her body, Kevin was taken into custody on charges of kidnapping and brutalizing his former fiancée. The young man himself categorically denied his guilt, although he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. However, his testimony has largely changed. The new version and found evidence. In the opinion of forensic experts, an experienced butcher or surgeon worked on the body of the girl. The hands were separated from the body with precise cuts on the joints, which spoke of a good knowledge of anatomy. The skin was also expertly and skillfully removed. As it turned out, the perpetrator removed it in places where there were tattoos, as well as noticeable birthmarks in order to eliminate the possibility of identifying the body by them. Since Kevin had worked as a butcher in the past and had extensive experience in cutting carcasses, the prosecution tried to cling to this thread. But the defendant's lawyers insisted that it was a mere coincidence, and this circumstance could not be used in court as evidence of their client's involvement in the case. According to the new version told by Pilcaster after his arrest, that evening they actually met with his ex-fiancée in a parking lot near his work. They were just talking when suddenly another guy approached them, who, according to Kevin, was Salma's new boyfriend. Allegedly, this guy was jealous of the girl's former fiancé and punched her in the face with a swing, but the defendant stood up for Salma. He told her to take shelter in his van, and he himself decided to deal with the offender in a manly manner. However, the fight had barely started when Salma jumped out of the van and begged Kevin not to hurt her boyfriend. After that, Salma and the stranger left, and Pilcaster went home. The defendant's parents and grandmother, who were called as witnesses, claimed that he returned home at midnight, changed his clothes, and went out with his new girlfriend named Consuela. Soon, the girl herself showed up at the station to confirm Kevin's alibi, saying that on that fateful night he was with her and could not have committed the crime, and then cover his tracks. The van in which the suspect was traveling was seized, and inside the vehicle was found washed-up traces of blood belonging to the deceased. In response, the young man claimed that Salma had gotten the nosebleed after a jealous boyfriend punched her, and she probably left a trail when she hid in the van while the men worked things out. However, according to Salma's family and friends, no new boyfriend has appeared for her since her breakup with her fiancé. She was completely absorbed in her studies, wrote a diploma, and preparing for his defense. By the way, to find this mysterious boyfriend, which Kevin could not even thickly describe, and failed, most likely because he made him up. Despite the new details and Consuela, who came out of nowhere to confirm the alibi of the accused, the whole story looked very strange and unreliable. Nevertheless, the court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was insufficient to convict. Pilcaster was acquitted and released from the courtroom in August 2019. Escape from the city. Almost immediately after his release, the young man hurriedly left his hometown, and for about 6 months did not give any news of himself at all. This caused a storm of indignation among the relatives of the murdered girl because the case was not closed. The investigation continued, and the only suspect was simply released like this. In fact, letting him escape. As this unprecedentedly brutal case became publicized, and its details were covered in the press for about 2 months, many residents of the city decided to express their support for the Montes family. People gathered at spontaneous rallies, demanding to find Kevin and to reopen the case against him, because he was clearly not telling something, and the story he told was not believable. Salma's family and the activists who helped them succeeded in getting the investigation reopened, and a second search of the suspect's home revealed a hidden cache in the wall containing Kevin's bloody clothes and a large kitchen knife, which he had probably used to kill and then partially cut up his victim. Most likely, he had not had time or was afraid to dispose of this evidence, believing that no one would find it in the stash. At almost the same time, Pilcaster, apparently following the advice of his lawyers, decided to make himself known and go on the attack. He didn't just make himself known, he filed a lawsuit against the Montes family, accusing them of slander, organizing his harassment, and tampering with evidence. The man said he was forced to leave town because he feared for his life because of the harassment organized by Soledad and Karen. In his opinion, the women had turned the entire town against him, and he was simply afraid of being lynched. As evidence, Kevin provided a mass of anonymous, threatening messages that he received on a daily basis, all because his personal information, including his phone number and email address, was published on the internet, as he assumed it was done by relatives of his ex-fiancée. He also claimed that he was being guarded under the house by unknown people who threatened to do away with him and his family. Following the gruesome discovery at the Pillcaster home, Kevin has once again become the prime suspect in the murder case and has once again been taken into custody. At the same time, the man and his lawyers insisted that the evidence was planted on him and also accused the Attorney General of collusion with the Montes family and the deliberate concealment of part of the CCTV footage, which allegedly could prove the innocence of the defendant and confirm his alibi. However, no such recordings were found because they simply did not exist. A new investigation and a protracted trial. Before Kevin could be taken back into custody, it was necessary to overturn his previous acquittal. This process was somewhat protracted because the judge did not want to admit his mistake and insisted that his decision was correct, and only right. However, after several sessions, the verdict was overturned, after which a new case was started, taking into account the discovered evidence. In this regard, Kevin's parents and grandmother decided to organize a real press conference, during which, answering questions from journalists, called their family members victims of the machinations of Soledad and Karen Montes. According to them, these women from the beginning were against the relationship between Kevin and Salma, while the Pillcasters loved Salma with all their hearts and already considered her a member of their family. They also claimed that they were literally crushed by the news of the death of the failed daughter-in-law, and soon they were in for another shock when their son was accused of Salma's murder. The suspect himself in the interrogation did not hide the fact that they had a difficult relationship with the former lover and even confirmed that, at times, raised his hand on her. He justified his actions by the fact that Salma, allegedly, he cheated and he had the right to punish her. He also did not hide that he was annoyed when Salma broke off the engagement, which she, in his opinion, had no right to do, because it offended him as a man. A new trial did not begin until June 2020. This time Kevin was charged with kidnapping and aggravated brutal murder motivated by gender-based hate. In fact, he himself led the investigation to this conclusion, constantly repeating, "A woman had no right to act and speak like that." The collected evidence, including the bloody clothes and the knife, which was recognized as the murder weapon, as well as the testimony of witnesses, was enough to convict. And the story previously told by Kevin about Salma's new boyfriend, who, in his opinion, and was the real culprit, simply fell apart because there was no other guy in the parking lot or in the life of Salma. However, the prosecution requested time to complete the investigation, and the court agreed to grant the request. In this regard, it was decided to send the defendant for 6 months of pre-trial detention in a maximum security prison. But due to the coronavirus pandemic that swept the world, the investigation was delayed, and court hearings were repeatedly postponed. So Kevin's 6-month pre-trial detention dragged on for almost 2 years. A fair sentence. It wasn't until May 2023, on the eve of the 4th anniversary of the crime, that a new hearing was held, at which the prosecution presented all the evidence it had managed to uncover in the meantime. In court, several witnesses testified to the fact that Pillcaster abused his fiancée, beat her, and sought to control her every move, depriving her of any freedom. He treated her like a thing that belonged only to him and did not accept the fact that she chose to leave him. On August 16, 2023, Kevin was found guilty of aggravated murder as well as cruelty to the body. As for the kidnapping, this point of the charge, according to the judge, was not proven because Salma herself came to meet with her ex-fiancé and herself could get into his car. Nevertheless, the evidence presented in the courtroom was enough to send a young man to prison for life. More precisely, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison. But if we take into account that at that time the defendant was 32 years old, it is fair to say that such a sentence became for him a life sentence. In addition, Kevin was required to pay the Montes family about $45,000 as moral compensation. Salma's mother and sister later stated that they were quite satisfied with the verdict, although Pillcaster never admitted his guilt, did not repent, and did not explain the motives for his terrible and inhumane act. Elusive hopes. In the spring of 1999, the community of Southport in the United Kingdom was split into 2 camps. The media and television were filled with numerous interviews with Mitchell Key, a man who, though unremarkable at first, had become a true folk hero. His sudden popularity was sparked by a scandal, the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Lindsay Wilson. One day, she left home without a trace, leaving behind 2 young children. Her distraught husband appeared worried and abandoned, pleading for her to reconsider and return. Along the way, he shared details of their marital life, occasionally speaking unfavorably about his spouse. He believed her behavior was driven by a desire for a free and extravagant lifestyle. Mitchell mentioned seeing his former beloved driving around town in an expensive car, although she just passed by. Most likely, the grief-stricken mother had left her children for a wealthy fiancé. Despite the image portrayed on TV and reality, he was enjoying a bachelor's life. As a result, one segment of the population sympathized with the lonely man, offering him attention and support. The other doubted him and suspected him of a horrendous crime. While Mitchell enjoyed widespread attention, law enforcement continued to search for the missing woman. His persona did not inspire trust, and there were complications in the case. According to Lindsay's relatives and friends, the couple's relationship was different from what her husband claimed. Everyone who knew her considered her a faithful wife and caring mother. Therefore, they were convinced something terrible must have happened to Lindsay. Otherwise, she would have made contact long ago. Suspicion was fueled by Mitchell's words during a famous talk show. When the host asked if he had ended his wife's life, his guest said he would not respond to such an indecent question, then paused and added, "Wait and find out." What was the exemplary husband and father implying? Perhaps he knew more than he shared, or was he so confident in his innocence that he was just waiting for everything to fall into place? Answers to these and other questions are forthcoming. Stockholm Syndrome. This is a shocking story about the terrible consequences of Stockholm Syndrome. The term refers to the traumatic bond between an aggressor and a victim, resulting in the victims sympathizing with their aggressor and often defending and justifying their actions. A decade ago, this phenomenon was examined through the lens of the relationship between a criminal and a hostage. However, today it has become widely recognized in the context of domestic relationships, explaining the behavior of a spouse enduring physical and emotional abuse from their partner. Typically, the wife adopts the role of the victim and the husband the tyrant. In most cases, domestic Stockholm Syndrome arises among individuals with a sacrificial mindset, attracting narcissistic characters whom they wish to heal and empower. And to ensure their tormentors do not feel alone, they are ready to share their pain. Let's not delve too deeply into psychology. The essence remains the same. Often, those who become victims of abuse are kind-hearted and empathetic people. Lindsay Wilson was one of them, a young woman who wanted to love and be loved. Her primary mistake was that she failed to recognize the object of her adoration in time. And as time passed, she struggled to escape from their codependent relationship. Lindsay's story. At 17, Lindsay discovered she was pregnant. Raised in a caring, large family, she hadn't imagined becoming a mother so early. She wasn't unprepared emotionally, but the fact that her boyfriend, with whom she'd been since she was 13, fled as soon as he learned about the impending fatherhood both upset and scared her. Lindsay knew all too well the physical and financial demands of motherhood. The Wilson family, though loving and close-knit, had often faced financial challenges. To provide for their children, her parents worked tirelessly. Therefore, when Lindsay met Mitchell Quee 5 months into her pregnancy, she considered it a gift of fate. Mitchell, a 20-year-old, acted like a true gentleman, being attentive and caring. Most importantly, her delicate condition did not deter him. Mitchell assured her he had fallen in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her and raise the child as his own. At that time, he was earning well and even started working extra hours so his beloved would want for nothing. The young couple's parents were shocked when they announced their decision to marry. They felt the 5-week-old relationship hadn't withstood the test of time and circumstances, and thus couldn't genuinely celebrate for them. The only thing Lindsay's relatives noted was that her former cheerfulness and good health had returned. At the same time, the new boyfriend seemed overly sweet to them, even cloyingly polite. Ultimately, no one interfered with their marriage, keeping their doubts to themselves. Red flag. The wedding took place in August 1995 within a close family circle. The majority of the guests were from the bride's side. The groom's side was represented by no more than 5 people: his parents, a brother, and 2 friends. During the celebration, Lindsay was ecstatic, believing she had won the lottery in life. However, the uneasy premonitions of Lindsay's relatives grew heavier when, by the end of the evening, the newlyweds had a dispute. The conflict unfolded before everyone's eyes. Something displeased Mitchell, and he started to shout loudly. It was unlikely that the reason was significant or appropriate for such a reaction. During the argument, he grabbed his new wife by the hand and started shaking her, which looked more than odd and threatening. Lindsay tried to calm him down. When the emotions subsided, the man apologized to everyone and later made light of the incident, emphasizing that it was just nerves due to the holiday bustle. At that moment, the girl did not give due attention to the situation and quickly forgot about it. However, in reality, it became one of the red flags in their toxic relationship. Diligent specialist. On February 5, 1999, a social worker officially reported Lindsay Key missing, expressing concern over being unable to reach her client. Lindsay had sought psychological support in a short period of their life together due to recurring incidents of domestic violence, and had bravely reported the situation at home. After her disclosure, the social worker had been monitoring the young family. She informed the police that she had been unable to contact Mrs. Key for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. The dedicated worker mentioned that she repeatedly asked to speak directly to Lindsay, but received evasive excuses. During her visits, she consistently left her contact details, yet Lindsay never called back. The social worker found this situation unsafe and requested a welfare check. Law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, but were also unable to speak with Lindsay. Her husband Mitchell explained that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but did not consider her missing. According to him, on Christmas Eve, Lindsay had gone to a party with a friend and returned home early in the morning, somewhat intoxicated. They had an argument afterwards. Lindsay then packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. He claimed she left him for another man and no longer wanted any contact. Search efforts. The search for Lindsay began. During conversations with her relatives, officers learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th, appearing in high spirits and looking well, and her behavior was normal. Her family had grown accustomed to her troubled marriage. Lindsay's mother also reported that she had tried multiple times to reach her daughter on December 24th to arrange a visit to give Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. Unable to reach Lindsay, she decided to visit in person. That day, Mitchell answered the door with the children and told her that his wife had left with friends and accused her of infidelity. However, Mrs. Wilson had long learned to take her son-in-law's words with a grain of salt. After giving the gifts to the children, she left. Detectives found it strange that no one had been concerned about the young woman's well-being for 2 months. However, there was an explanation. Everyone knew that Mitchell restricted his wife's interactions with the outside world, even with close relatives. They had previously experienced difficulty communicating with her. Therefore, it was plausible for Lindsay to drop out of sight for a while. Nonetheless, this did not mean they were not concerned about her. The news alarmed them. Everyone asserted that she did not drink and led a modest lifestyle. Moreover, her husband had forbidden her all contact with the outside world, not to mention meetings with friends and acquaintances. Inconsistencies, everything Mr. Key told the police contradicted his character profile, arousing investigators' suspicions. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell could simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. However, the situation demanded a thorough investigation. To this end, the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances and tried to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where the couple lived and its surroundings. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted. By the time Lindsay's disappearance was noted, some time had elapsed. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person, On December 15th, she was at the local post office, sending several letters and postcards as usual. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day. Lindsay had visited despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea and a brief conversation, after which Lindsay saw her guest out. On the way, she slipped a note into her sister's hand and asked her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and in the whirlwind of days, forgot about it. Regrettably, the older sister couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again. Over several months, investigators tried to cling to any information. They began to suspect that she was no longer alive, as she had not been in contact for so long. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence. However, the more they learned about the couple's life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. Marriage. Shortly after their wedding, Mitchell and Lindsay decided to move away from their parents. They rented an apartment in Southport. Sometime later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the joy of the new baby was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment he could be joking and laughing, the next he became unbalanced and aggressive. Trying to maintain a fragile peace at home, she didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. However, loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations. Mitchell would kneel, beg for forgiveness, and profess his love. It seemed for a while that peace had returned to the family. But then, the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening. They advised her to return home and end her suffering. But it was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time, her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control. He forbade his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricted her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Once, Lindsay confided to her older sister that she suspected her husband of infidelity. She told her about a woman who came to their home looking for him and was very surprised to learn he was married. That day, another argument erupted, but this time it escalated to physical violence. Gradually, physical abuse became a part of their life. To prevent his wife from complaining about him and tarnishing his reputation, the man began to limit her interactions, starting with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and later with her family. Despite being unhappy, Lindsay still tried to maintain contact secretly, fearing being discovered and punished. At the same time, despite the evident problems, Lindsay continued to stay with Mitchell. Along with her feelings, the comfortable life he provided was a factor. He earned well, supporting her and their child, paying the bills. She truly lacked nothing financially. Second chance. The era of living in a gilded cage came to an end for Mrs. Key when she found out she was pregnant again. At that moment, she was certain she no longer wanted more children. It's only fair to note that Mitchell was good to his stepdaughter, even loving her. However, Lindsay deemed the current circumstances unfavorable for bringing another child into the world and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When her husband learned of this, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. That same evening, she packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family breathed a sigh of relief. There, she proceeded with the pregnancy as she had planned. Over time, however, she began to miss her husband. He wouldn't leave her alone, frequently calling and begging her to come back. Mitchell tried everything to prove he had changed. Eventually, he managed to convince Lindsay. Initially, everything went well, and it seemed as if their old feelings had returned. The Keys were expecting another child. This peace lasted for 6 months until Mitchell had a severe anger outburst. Fortunately, he did not direct his rage at his pregnant wife, but took it out on the apartment. He smashed everything he could see, destroyed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and even stained the walls with blood and food remnants. He threw the television out of the window and smashed the car parked outside. The landlord demanded not only compensation for the damage and repairs, but also that they vacate the apartment. This situation worsened the family's financial position, requiring additional expenses. As a result, the couple had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. You can't run from yourself. In October 1997, their son Jack was born. The father adored the boy. However, the relationship between the spouses became increasingly tense. Throughout their married life, Mitchell frequently left home, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a week, often over trivial or fabricated reasons. Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior. Yet, when he abandoned her again, she filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. Apparently, she realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own. Therefore, she reached out to a local charity that assists women in difficult life situations. They helped her find subsidized housing in another city. Lindsay feared that Mitchell would discover her new address or phone number, so she took measures to distance herself from him. After he made several threats, she even obtained a restraining order from law enforcement. With the help of a therapist, she began to rebuild her life. She started a journal where she documented her life and experiences, intending to leave it to her children so they would never repeat her mistakes. The entries confirmed the relatives' claims about the difficult dynamics within the family. Despite her precautions, Mitchell discovered her phone number and incessantly called, demanding to see his son. With her newfound freedom, Lindsay felt lonely, and after a short time, she could not resist his persistence. They began communicating and seeing each other again, and eventually moved back in together. The mother of two was ashamed to admit her own weakness, so she told no one about it. Nevertheless, the secret came out. Relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by the reunion with the tyrant. They couldn't understand why she had let him back into her life. Mitchell remained unpopular with Lindsay's relatives. They, too, wanted nothing to do with him. Ultimately, their communication nearly ceased. Despite all efforts, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. Thus, her circle saw no point in trying to save her anymore, accepted the situation, and stepped back. However, this time, her decision proved to be fatal. Villain in disguise. At the outset of the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance, Mr. Key was initially helpful in the search efforts. However, as the case gained media attention, his focus shifted dramatically. He turned his misfortune into a public spectacle, becoming a media figure in the process. As Mitchell invited more journalists into his home, his abundant media appearances began to seem less genuine, with viewers often noting a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents considered their son-in-law to be involved in their daughter's disappearance, and detectives also viewed him as the prime suspect. Yet, the lack of direct evidence tied their hands. Searches were conducted not just at the couple's home, but throughout the area. After a provocative question during a televised interview, the antagonist became even more brazen, even declaring that the time would come when his wife's family would have to apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mr. Key sent a postcard to the lead investigator on the case. Attached to it was a pack of hair dye. Instead of a festive greeting, Mitchell wrote, "I hope this covers your gray and gives you a bit more confidence," mocking the detective and displaying his own arrogance. In the media, he had already played the victim of not only marital infidelity, but also of harsh treatment by authorities. To put this upstart in his place, the investigation team gave an interview. Without revealing all the details of the case, they hinted that the well-known family man was not who he claimed to be. Tarnished reputation. In February 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal. It became known that he had been forging his wife's signature to receive social benefits, serving as another indirect proof of his involvement in Lindsay's disappearance and presumed demise. The investigators wanted to latch onto a financial motive. However, the suspect's popularity worked in his favor. Many supporters emerged, arguing that as a single father, he had every right to financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring the charges they desired. Nevertheless, they managed to charge him with fraud. Mr. Quee was brought to court for the benefit fraud and was found guilty, sentenced to a month of community service. This time, Mitchell couldn't walk away unscathed. The forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared more than suspicious. The number of angry comments increased. Eventually, the man's patience snapped, and he began lashing out, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. A new beginning. The case of Lindsay Key's disappearance might have remained unsolved had it not been for a clue discovered by chance. On June 1st, 2000, a park-goer noticed his dog acting strangely near the roller coaster at a city amusement park. The animal uncovered human remains. Specialists were called to the scene, and the remains were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that they were parts of a female torso. Genetic testing confirmed they belonged to Lindsay Key, who had been missing for a long time. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay had been the victim of a brutal crime. The focus now was to find the perpetrator. On June 7th, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. The detectives were determined, and after more than 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down under the pressure and confessed. Dismemberment murder. On December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister, Lindsay informed her husband that she wanted a divorce. This time, she was resolute. According to Key, this news infuriated him, leading him to attack and strangle her. The incident occurred in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, stuffing the gap under the door to mask any odors. Realizing he couldn't dispose of the body alone, he enlisted the help of his brother Elliot, a butcher who he thought could assist. Elliot was initially hesitant, but was eventually persuaded by Mitchell. While the children played in the next room, they dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, the murderer expressed no remorse or empathy. Instead, he seemed proud of his actions, stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led them to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs. Sadly, her head and one hand were never recovered. The forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay's. There was no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The final judgment. The trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001. The court proceedings were swift and straightforward. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. The court-appointed psychiatrist noted that the defendant showed all the signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. Just 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Wilson family. One of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. In his farewell note, he wrote that he saw no point in continuing in such a cruel world and wished to reunite with his sister. As of 2017, Mitchell Key has been eligible for parole. However, as of January 2023, his lawyers have been denied 3 times. The Wilsons, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released. Consequently, they have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. As long as the voices of the victim's family are considered, the criminal will continue to serve his sentence. Regardless, no punishment can bring Lindsay back. In an interview, Mr. Wilson mentioned hearing rumors that his former relative had attempted to end his life. He added that he sincerely hopes the murderer will try again and succeed this time. Experience shows that most women with domestic Stockholm syndrome try to adapt to their abusers throughout their lives. Even when their families come to their aid, they continue to act against their own best interests. In such cases, only deep self-reflection and psychotherapy can help. If the victim does not come to realize the recklessness of their actions, the end of the relationship will be dire. Thanksgiving is a traditional family holiday. During this time, multiple generations gather around a festive table in the home of the elders. Each person present is expected to express gratitude for the blessings of the past year and to show love and respect for their relatives. This is how it goes for most families. However, there are those who disregard these established customs. In such relationships, things often leave much to be desired, and even significant dates hold little meaning. For domestic violence, there are no restraining factors. The boundaries of what is acceptable have long been broken. This is a new story about the horrific events that took place in one American family on the eve of a national holiday. Call for help. On November 23, 2006, at 3:46 p.m., a call was made to the Memphis, Tennessee Emergency Services. It's understood that misfortunes don't take holidays or weekends, so it can't be said that the atmosphere at 911 was relaxed. However, the dispatcher who took the call was in shock, as he later admitted to a colleague. What startled the operator was the absolute calmness of the caller, as if he wasn't asking for help but placing a breakfast order. The man identified himself as Jeffrey Scott and reported that his wife had been unconscious since 11 a.m. At the same time, a voice in the background corrected him, saying that the woman was most likely dead. When the dispatcher asked for clarification, Scott stated, "She was breathing a second ago and now she's dead." His voice didn't waver. Information about a possible crime was immediately relayed to the rescue service leadership, and a specialized team was dispatched to the scene. The victim. Law enforcement arrived at the address within minutes. They were met by the homeowner, who led them to the bedroom where his wife, Ashley Scott, lay. Upon entering the room, they saw someone bending over her, performing CPR. The man introduced himself as Dr. Robert McGee, a friend of Jeffrey. He said the woman was still alive, but on the brink of death. Her pulse was barely detectable, and her blood pressure was dangerously low. Medics examined the woman and agreed with his assessment. They suspected that she had sustained a head injury from a blunt object and was close to death. Her pupils were dilated and unresponsive to light, and blood was coming from her mouth and nose. Additionally, Ashley's body showed signs of trauma. Her legs, chest, and back bore numerous bruises and abrasions. The medical team attempted emergency resuscitation. They intubated her, used a defibrillator, and administered heart-stimulating drugs, but none of it helped. The young woman was dying before their eyes. In the end, she was rushed to the hospital. A neurosurgeon was called to assess her condition in the emergency department. His diagnosis was grim and confirmed his colleagues' opinions. The 28-year-old woman was in a critical state, at the final stage of brain death. There was nothing that could be done to help her. Her body systems and vital organs were shutting down. As a result, it was decided not to prolong the patient's suffering and to disconnect her from life support. She passed away shortly after. There was no doubt that Ashley had been brutally deprived of life. Her right ear was green, a color typical of those who box and take repeated blows to the same spot. Additionally, a man's shoe print was visible on her back. It seemed as though someone had trampled, if not jumped, on her. Her fragile body was covered in bruises at various stages of healing, indicating that she had been subjected to periodic violence. Family doctor. While doctors fought for the life of a young and beautiful woman, police officers were questioning McGee and Scott. The doctor explained that he was the one who insisted on calling emergency services and shared what he knew. At 2:30 p.m., Jeffrey, his friend, called him. The men had met during their college years and occasionally kept in touch. Over the phone, Jeffrey mentioned that he had been drinking with his wife the night before, and afterward she felt unwell. She went to bed, but never woke up. He then decided to seek professional help. At the time, the doctor was busy but postponed his duties and arrived at the couple's home. There, he found Jeffrey next to his wife, who showed no signs of life. The doctor suspected that the couple had quarreled and something unfortunate had occurred, which they wanted to keep quiet about. That's why they contacted him. He knew that the couple had been going through tough times recently. Each reacted differently. Ashley drank, and Jeffrey was quick to anger and often raised his hand against her. When the doctor examined Ashley, he realized that the situation was far more severe than he had initially thought. There was no chance of survival, and the poor woman needed immediate medical attention. He insisted that Jeffrey call 911. At the same time, Robert pieced together the situation in his mind. He understood that something much more serious had happened, possibly a premeditated crime. He admitted to the police that he had deliberately delayed Scott at the scene to prevent him from fleeing. Jeffrey's lies. Throughout this, Jeffrey remained utterly emotionless. It seemed as though he had no concern for the future of the woman he once loved. When asked by the police what had happened, he explained that the previous evening they had argued. The reason was the discovery of Ashley's messages with another man. He believed his wife was cheating on him. Unable to bear the betrayal, he struck her, but only once. After that, she stumbled and fell, as she was heavily intoxicated. Jeffrey noted that his wife frequently abused alcohol and behaved irrationally. He didn't want to tolerate her outbursts anymore and kicked her out of the house. In such instances, she would usually sleep in the garage. In the morning, he found his wife there, still asleep. Feeling pity, Jeffrey carried her into the house and laid her on the bed. Time passed, but she didn't wake up. That's when he realized something was wrong and tried to revive her himself. Then he contacted his doctor friend and called him to the house. However, the police didn't believe his story. When they arrived, the woman was covered in bruises from head to toe. She was bleeding, with her face and head battered. Even if she had been drunk and fallen, she wouldn't have caused such injuries to herself. It was clear she had been beaten. Scott was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. As soon as the autopsy results came in, the charge was upgraded to first-degree crime. Autopsy results. The pathologist's report was chilling. The cause of Ashley Scott's death was a subdural hematoma on the right side of her brain. Such injuries are caused by a severe blow to the head. Her brain essentially slammed against her skull, leading to massive bleeding and swelling, cutting off the oxygen supply. This caused her body systems and organs to begin failing. It's an excruciating process. What's even more tragic is that she could have been saved if help had been provided in time, preferably within the first few hours. Additionally, more than 50 hematomas were found on her body. They varied in color and density, confirming the medic's statements that the woman had been repeatedly assaulted. It was hard to imagine the torment Ashley had endured over time. The most horrifying aspect was that the person who inflicted this suffering was the one who was supposed to protect her. Evidence. After Jeffrey's arrest, detectives began examining the crime scene. Signs of a struggle were found throughout the house. Items were scattered everywhere, and furniture was overturned. A broken vase lay in the living room. On the kitchen table, near a laptop, were printed messages between Ashley and her lover, confirming the suspect's claims about the motive for the crime. Upon closer inspection of the garage, officers found bloodstains on the floor. Inside Mrs. Scott's car were women's clothes and other personal items. There was also a handbag containing her documents and passport. It appeared that the deceased had planned to escape, but she didn't make it. Officers then decided to speak with the family's relatives and friends, which revealed unexpected details about their lives and circumstances, shedding light on the incident. Unfortunately, it happens that women fall in love with the wrong men and tie their lives to them. Initially, everything seems bright and promising, but soon the object of their affection turns into a dreadful tyrant, and life with them becomes a nightmare. The victim of both emotional and physical abuse loses their sense of reality and may even justify the abuser's actions. In these cases, outside psychological help is needed, as the victim is often unable to help themselves or escape the situation. The kind soul of Ashley Pittman. Ashley Scott, née Pittman, was born on November 4, 1978, in Bossier City, Louisiana. Her parents separated while she was still in her mother's womb. However, fate smiled upon Donna, and she met Jimmy Pittman, whom she later married. Jimmy adopted Ashley and loved her from the moment she was born. Notably, Jimmy already had a 5-year-old daughter named Kika. Unfortunately, Jimmy and Donna's marriage didn't last long, and they divorced a few years later. It's important to note that Donna left the family herself and eventually remarried. Ashley chose to stay with her father but continued to see her mother. Despite her parents' divorce, Ashley had a good childhood. She grew up kind and obedient. Everyone around her considered her a true beauty. and predicted a bright future for her. In 1996, she graduated from high school and then enrolled at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkansas. It was there that she met her first love. Jeffrey Scott had attended the same school as her and, by a stroke of fate, enrolled at the same university. Jeffrey also noticed the beautiful girl with a radiant smile, and before long, they started dating. The young couple seemed perfect, always together and holding hands. Ashley's friends envied her, believing she had found a reliable partner. Ashley fueled their curiosity by sharing how sweet and kind he was and how lucky she felt to have him. In 2000, Pittman received her long-awaited degree in education. Now, her childhood dream was about to come true. She wanted to become a teacher and dedicate her life to children. Unhappy celebrations. Finally, on June 9, 2001, Ashley and Jeffrey got married. However, things didn't go as they had appeared in her girlhood dreams. Unexpectedly for everyone, a dark side of her chosen one came to light. To be more precise, it became noticeable to others, although the bride herself had known about it but chose to ignore it. A year before the wedding, Ashley sent a letter to her sister, Keika, stating that she could no longer communicate with them, but they should respect her decision. Naturally, her family wasn't invited to the wedding either. Friends of Ashley, who had the fortune to attend the ceremony, were shocked. The overwhelming majority of guests were from the groom's side, while Ashley had a large, close-knit family. This struck them as odd. However, they later understood why. The reason was that her family did not share her views on Jeffrey, and he made no effort to change their minds. Behind the seemingly nice guy lurked something sinister. He frequently spoke ill of her family and behaved inappropriately. He offended those close to her and felt justified in doing so. What was most surprising was her reaction. It was as if Ashley was making excuses for him. During the wedding, Jeffrey once again insulted some of her friends and acted arrogantly. Eventually, when the newlyweds moved to Cordova, a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee, her relationships with many people deteriorated. Those who didn't turn away from her continued to stay in touch, but kept their distance. The dark side of Jeffrey Scott. After the move, the head of the family started working as a computer systems technician at his father's company, while the newly minted Mrs. Scott became an English teacher at a middle school. Everyone spoke highly of her. Ashley was considered beautiful and cheerful, intelligent and sociable. She loved her job and her students. Later, Paul Dooley described his colleague as a skilled specialist and talented educator. She was the main reason to get up in the morning and go to English class, he shared. In court, he admitted that the school was the only place where she felt safe and loved. The educational institution became a refuge where Jeffrey Scott couldn't reach her. Indeed, as time passed, the relationship between the spouses worsened. Ashley's connection with her family nearly broke. She didn't want to discuss it and called the situation her personal choice. Without a doubt, these conclusions were made under the influence of a master manipulator. Her husband was precisely that. In the early years, he completely dominated her and cut her off from outside support. Daily criticisms for every little thing lowered her self-esteem. Scott suppressed his wife in any way he could. During this period, she communicated with only a few people. Among them was her childhood friend, Lori. The girls had been friends since 5th grade and maintained contact into adulthood. Reunion evening. In September 2006, a high school reunion was planned for the school where Ashley studied. She was eager to attend, and despite her husband's reluctance, she went to the event. Those present didn't notice any significant changes in her. However, Lori was concerned. Throughout the evening, Jeffrey constantly called his wife, not allowing her to relax and enjoy herself. He asked whom she was talking to, what she was wearing, what she was eating and drinking, and what she was discussing. In short, he tried to control every minute of her life. That evening, Ashley confessed to Lori the nightmare she was living in and said she couldn't go on like this. She revealed that she was considering divorce and had even contacted a divorce attorney. She also admitted that she knew about her husband's repeated infidelities. She mentioned, for example, an affair with a colleague named Blair Brown, with whom she had once gotten along well. However, she noted that over time, she forgave her acquaintance. Blair had reached out to her to share who Jeffrey really was and how dangerous he could be. It should be noted that this party was the last in the young woman's life. After that, she didn't speak to anyone for several weeks, and new bruises appeared on her body. Lori's testimony. Detectives became interested in the stories shared by Ashley's relatives and friends. Through conversations with them, they gathered a lot of valuable information. Lori also revealed that shortly before Ashley's death, Jeffrey had called her several times to complain about his wife. He claimed that she drank heavily, lost her balance, and often fell, which explained why she was covered in bruises. However, the next morning, Ashley wouldn't remember these events and would blame him. He attributed her growing alcohol dependency to their mutual acquaintance, Blair, claiming that she had corrupted Ashley and turned her against him. He also mentioned that he no longer wanted to have children because he felt disgusted with his wife after everything that had happened. Scott accused his wife of constant infidelity, lying, and alcoholism. However, Lori didn't believe any of this and thought he was trying to justify himself. Eventually, Lori realized that Ashley had become a victim of domestic violence and was in serious trouble. After each of these calls, she would try to call her friend back, but Ashley wouldn't pick up, which was very strange. The last time they saw each other was shortly before the tragic events. The friends went shopping, but Ashley didn't buy anything for herself. She was sad and pensive. Lori tried to talk to her about her marriage, but Ashley said she didn't want to ruin the evening and changed the subject. The only thing she mentioned about the impending divorce was that she was ready to take that step but was very afraid. She knew Jeffrey well and feared his reaction could be completely unpredictable. Blair's testimony. Next, Blair Brown, whose name frequently came up in the Scott family, was called in for questioning. She admitted that she had indeed been Jeffrey's lover in the past. Therefore, she knew firsthand about his uncontrollable fits of rage. It was established that the friendship between the two women was rekindled about 6 months before the crime. Blair felt sympathy for her and provided occasional support. She also admitted that her relationship with Jeffrey was a mistake and apologized repeatedly for it. The women sometimes met and had drinks together. Ashley would often hide at Blair's place to get away from Jeffrey. One day, he tracked her down and came for her. At that moment, Blair witnessed a brutal attack. Scott struck his wife several times in the face and threw her out onto the street, completely unfazed by the presence of a witness. Even after these events, Ashley downplayed his guilt and made excuses for him. The accused. During another interrogation, Scott admitted that he contacted Robert McGee only 12 to 15 hours after the argument. All that time, his wife had been unconscious, alone in the garage. Jeffrey continued to insist that he had only struck her once because of the discovered infidelity. After that, he sent her to the garage, brought bedding, and threw it on the floor. The bleeding woman was left to spend her last hours freezing and suffering in pain, while her husband rested comfortably in the house. However, the autopsy results did not support his claims. It was clear that he had always treated his wife poorly. Additionally, detectives learned that Jeffrey occasionally used the services of escorts, even when Ashley was at the reunion. Despite this, he blamed her for all their problems. Indeed, shortly before she decided to file for divorce, Ashley met a young man named Michael Lowe. They exchanged messages from October 29th to November 22nd, 2006. He was the one who encouraged her to leave her husband, assuring her that he would support her and had everything ready for her departure. Michael told her that he loved her and wanted to show her a different life. When Jeffrey read their messages, he was enraged and decided to teach his unfaithful wife a lesson. The trial and the advocate. The trial of Jeffrey Scott began on January 13, 2009. The prosecution argued that it was a premeditated crime. It was evident that the argument between the spouses started in the living room, where a vase was found broken. They then moved through the house, with Ashley enduring violence in nearly every room. Bloodstains were found in almost every room. The divorce attorney Ashley had consulted testified for the prosecution. She explained that she had met with Ashley the day before her death. At that point, all the documents for the divorce were ready. All her client had to do was pack her things and leave the house while her husband was at work. Rachel advised that Ashley should leave secretly. This explains the items and documents found in her car. However, Ashley didn't follow the expert's advice. She didn't want to leave without explaining to her husband, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. The advocate tried her best to help Ashley and even provided her services for a symbolic fee. The attorney also mentioned that she knew her client had been drinking and had quit her beloved job because of it. She did this to numb the emotions she felt in her marriage and needed support. For a long time, the women communicated in secret. This was done to ensure Ashley's departure was as safe as possible. Since her husband controlled all calls, they met on neutral ground or communicated via payphone. Many witnesses confirmed that they had seen scratches or bruises on Ashley, which she carefully concealed under layers of makeup. Some knew the real cause of the injuries but felt powerless to help. In their final report, the medical examiners noted that Ashley had frequently been kicked. It seems Jeffrey would knock her to the ground and then stomp on her. Old bruises from shoes were found on her back and legs. The devil's advocate. The defense team for the accused worked tirelessly to reduce the charge to second-degree crime. The attorney painted the victim in an unflattering light, portraying her as an alcoholic and unstable hysteric. In short, they did everything possible to make the jury believe that Scott also suffered in the marriage. The defense discredited the victim, who couldn't defend herself because she was no longer alive. It was revealed that in 2005, Ashley had been fined for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Jeffrey claimed he wanted to repair the marriage, bought a new home, and was open to having children, all for a woman who had a lover and exchanged intimate photos with him. Regarding the crime itself, he claimed he lost control, realizing his efforts were futile and that Ashley had found someone else. "I regret the pain I caused you," he addressed his wife's family, "but I mourn her loss and pray for her soul." In contrast, during the trial, it was noted that after his arrest, Scott didn't ask about his wife's condition. Instead, he inquired about the outcome of a recent football game. His attorney played dirty. During his statement, he even claimed that the victim sustained most of her injuries during a seizure caused by alcohol withdrawal. An independent expert was found to back up this claim. To refute this, the assistant county medical examiner was called to testify. He read the autopsy results, listed all the injuries on the body, and most importantly, stated the cause of death, which could not have resulted from accidental falls. Prosecutor's argument. The prosecutor argued that the defense's version of an unintentional crime was absurd. It was clear that the victim wanted to escape her tormentor, but, out of affection for her husband, hoped to end things amicably. Meanwhile, the accused showed her the printout of her messages with Michael and attacked her. As he struck her repeatedly, he knew he was causing unbearable pain and suffering. He then finished her off in the garage, where she lost consciousness. Scott saw the severity of her injuries but ignored them and didn't seek medical help. The criminal chose to wait and only then called a doctor. The prosecutor insisted that the accused wanted his wife dead. However, a surprising fact came to light. Investigators found evidence that Ashley had wanted to save the marriage. It was discovered that she had been taking special medication to get pregnant and had supported the purchase of a new home. Perhaps she was so dependent on the toxic relationship that she couldn't imagine life without Jeffrey. However, she eventually decided to leave. It's possible she didn't want to leave secretly, hoping to hear from her husband that he would change and everything would be fine. Victims of abuse often cling to such illusory hopes. Guilty verdict. On January 19, 2009, Jeffrey Scott was found guilty of second-degree crime. Even the judge was dissatisfied with the jury's verdict, criticizing the jurors because the vote in favor of the original charge was 12-1. There was one person who didn't believe the accused was guilty enough. According to state law, a unanimous decision is required to convict someone of first-degree crime. The victim's family was also disheartened. The accused will spend 25 years behind bars without the possibility of parole. Conclusion. Perhaps this punishment isn't enough for someone who tormented a woman for years. The tyrant isolated her from everyone, brainwashed her, and made her think that she and her family weren't good enough to be part of his life. Nevertheless, Ashley's father said, "This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. I loved that little girl. If she had died a natural death, I would have come to terms with it over time. But knowing how cruelly my daughter died and who was responsible, I will never be able to accept it." The story of Ashley Scott's life teaches us many things, but most importantly, no matter what happens, we should never isolate ourselves from our loved ones. Sometimes, they are the only ones who truly care about us and can help us. If Dave Krupa had known how his online dating would turn out, he would never have registered on a dating site. He would have continued to live his old life, with his girlfriend Amy Flora and their 2 children together. Maybe finally, he would have legalized the 12-year relationship after all. Especially since after the breakup, Amy and Dave remained good friends. Periodically, they spent vacations together with their children, fulfilling their parenting duties to perfection. That was in 2011, and by the summer of 2012, Dave was ready to start a new relationship. Only the man was not looking for any commitment, preferring to remain single. He wanted to get acquainted with women who would not mind a free relationship and did not make far-reaching plans. With such thoughts, he came to the dating site, a place where everyone is looking for something different. The modern world has brought with it new technologies that allow you to build communication at a distance, bypassing many nuances, the awkwardness of the first acquaintance, the appearance at the same time, the fear of being rejected. Now, to get acquainted with someone who is interesting to you, it has become simple. It is enough only to choose the intended partner by a set of characteristics specified by him in the questionnaire. Even leave the house for this unnecessary. However, who is hiding behind a cute avatar profile, it is not known, and whether he corresponds to those features that describe too. And the real goals of dating are not always voiced in advance and found out at later stages of the relationship. Carrie Leah Farver was born on November 30th, 1974 in Macedonia, Nebraska, USA. Having a failed experience of previous relationships, she alone raised her son, Maxwell. At one time, the child was a reward as well as a challenge for her. Despite her great love for the baby, she once spent a month in bed, going into a deep depression. The child's care was provided by Carrie's mother, Nancy Rainey. Difficult relations with the father of the child, unsettled living conditions, served as a reason for the appearance of a young 20-year-old woman such an acute psychological state. Doctors later diagnosed Farver with bipolar disorder. People with this diagnosis are like 2 sides of the same coin. The person falls into extremes. His mood becomes either too good or too bad. Euphoria, increased efficiency, extreme friendliness is replaced by a depressed state, bitterness, impotence, and so on. The disease greatly complicates the normal life of a person, but in the early 2000s, Carrie's doctor was able to find such an effective treatment for her, after which she was able to live like other people. Whether she wanted to settle her personal life is a rhetorical question. On the one hand, absolutely. What woman does not dream of a worthy companion? On the other hand, why tie yourself to someone who may later become the cause of many worries and misfortunes? Carrie grew up in a full loving family, had an active life position, engaged in sports, dreamed of devoting herself to medicine. However, dreams were not allowed to materialize. At the first practice in the medical college, where the girl entered, she lost consciousness at the sight of blood. Therefore, deciding not to risk neither her health nor the health of patients, she studied to become a programmer. In the fall of 2012 in the neighboring city of Omaha, Carrie was offered a job on good terms. She couldn't turn down the prospects that lay ahead of her, so she accepted the offer. Since Max was in middle school, The boy did not want to change his familiar surroundings and move with his mother. He remained to reside with his grandmother in Macedonia. Carrie Farver's friend, Amy Long, recalled that she couldn't help but be noticed. When she walked into a room, all eyes were on her and her radiant smile. Perhaps that's what Dave Krupa liked about her one November day in 2012. Carrie met Dave at the auto repair shop where he worked. While looking at Carrie's car, a Ford Explorer, he realized he was very attractive to this woman. "She's showing me something inside the car, and we're standing there and we're very close. And there was some tension," Dave later recalled. It didn't take long for the date to arrive, and it was afterward that they went up to Dave's house. Except that their privacy was marred by many calls and messages from a certain Liz, who later stopped by the man's apartment to pick up something left for her earlier. Dave explained to Carrie that this was his former companion, Liz Golar, whom he met on a dating site about 6 months ago and had been dating for a while. He also explained that the woman was extremely clingy, which was the reason for their breakup. Carrie was very understanding, so she wasn't confused when she saw another woman in the man's apartment. After all, everyone has their own handleless suitcase from the past that occasionally makes itself known. So Carrie remained unfazed, but Liz was clearly upset to see a strange woman in Dave's house. 2 weeks after moving in, Carrie began dating Dave. They had discussed their relationship with each other beforehand, agreeing only to a brief, unencumbered affair. Shanna, Elizabeth Golar, better known as Liz, was the first person Dave met online in 2012. Liz was born in 1975 in Michigan. Dave liked her at first. She claimed that she was also not looking for a serious relationship, especially since she was a mother, and most of her time should be spent on her children, not men. By the way, they both had children around the same age. Dave repeatedly noted that Liz was unlikely to be a real-life partner for him, since she was neither well-read nor educated, which was important in a relationship between a man and a woman. They had few topics of conversation, and the relationship emphasized more on the horizontal. Over time, Liz became interested in what Dave was doing in her absence, who he was seeing, to which the man repeatedly pointed out that they were in an open relationship and she shouldn't care. Dave also told her that she could behave as she wished, that he did not restrict her from dating other men. However, apparently Liz was not satisfied with this, and she began to pester Dave more and more. But most of all, Liz was jealous of Dave's children and their mother Amy. She couldn't understand the warm relationship that remained between them after the breakup. Eventually, Liz's actions forced Dave to distance himself. Then Carrie appeared on the horizon. Carrie was beautiful, with style and intelligence. Dave could talk to her for hours. They matched on everything. "I felt like I hit the jackpot," Dave claimed. Liz, sensing that the man was pulling away from her more and more, began to remind him of himself with more activity. She wrote messages, emails, and called. However, he wasn't going to stop seeing Carrie or anyone else for her. Soon, Carrie and Dave were spending more and more nights together. Dave allowed himself to do this because it was convenient for Carrie to get to work, and he enjoyed her company. Carrie acted like she was not looking for something serious, but was just enjoying the moment, having fun. In December 2015, Liz was shot. The woman, in all likelihood, guessed who it was. As luck would have it, the wound turned out to be non-fatal. "This can't go on any longer. I have to do something about it," thought Liz. Leaving for work on November 13, 2012, Carrie kissed Dave and promised to see him later. That was the last time he would see her. At 9:45 a.m. while at work, Dave was very surprised by the contents of a text message from Carrie. She texted him that she wanted to live with him and move in with him permanently. The correspondence was very disconcerting to Krupp. He could not understand Farver's sudden change of mood, as they had discussed this point beforehand. They had jointly decided that they would not rush into a relationship. They were happy as they were now. The message, however, told a different story. Dave gently replied that he wasn't ready for such a change. The counter-message from Carrie was not pleasant. "Lots of profanity," he described the message. "I didn't know what to think. I was shocked." When he returned to the apartment, he found that all of Carrie's belongings that she had brought to him were gone. Apparently, that's why he thought the woman had left him. That same day, Carrie deleted him from her Facebook friends. That would seem to be the end of it. But no. Dave started receiving text messages and emails from Carrie several times a day. They contained curses and threats to ruin his life. There were so many of them, and they were all rude. Carrie also didn't show up for work, which was unlike her, since she was notable for her punctuality. Strange messages from Carrie Farver were sent not only to Dave Krupa, but also to her mother and her 15-year-old son. She wrote that she had found a job in Kansas and planned to take Max. But for now, she wants to be alone as she is worried about her failed romance. In May 2013, Carrie in her Facebook profile published a rather long post, which read, "I've answered enough questions to prove to everyone that I've had enough. You can either believe I'm your daughter, mother, sister, and friend you've known your whole life, or just leave me alone. I left of my own free will, and I'm sick of everyone giving me a hard time for doing what I had to do. I don't miss it, I just don't want to go home right now. I'm a grown woman, and if I feel like leaving home, I have the right to do so. So when I'm ready to come home, I will. I'm sorry that after hurting everyone, I just up and left." Time passed, however. Carrie never showed up. The woman's mother clearly realized something was wrong with her daughter when she missed her own birthday, as well as Max's birthday and other family celebrations. The final straw was her father's funeral. After a while, Liz Goler also started receiving messages from Carrie. In them, she insulted and humiliated the woman, and some messages contained a threat to stay away from Dave. In order for the man to be able to explain such strange behavior of her friend, Liz decided to contact him. He told her that he was in exactly the same situation. Carrie attacked him with messages and emails. In them, the woman accused her former lover of all sins, called him a lecher, and promised revenge for all the pain he had caused her with his response. Sometimes the messages were ominous in nature, telling her what Dave was up to at the moment. The fact that they were in the same position brought Dave and Liz even closer together. He felt even more guilty for the inconvenience he had caused her. Soon, the incessant messages from Carrie became more threatening. The text was illogical and full of grammatical errors. Carrie's mother insisted that her daughter had never been an angry person and that she had always written letters and other documents correctly. Carrie was meticulous about spelling and style. Did Carrie's bipolar disorder develop into something more after a second trigger? Could it be that she had experienced even greater mental abnormalities? There was no explanation for Carrie's actions other than her uncontrolled mental state. The main sign of dissociative identity disorder, split personality, is the existence of a separate self-consciousness in each ego. At the same time, each of them has a different memory, thinking, behavior, and even inclinations to certain actions. Could this explain Carrie's strange behavior and even her altered writing style? Everything pointed to the woman's instability. That's why the police didn't consider Carrie Farver missing. Focused on stopping the pursuit of Liz and Dave, they tried to track Carrie through her cell phone. But it was all in vain. The signals were being blocked. Liz and Dave were still receiving hundreds of texts and emails. Sometimes, even when they were together, their phones would receive nasty messages at the same time. The couple continued to date, but Dave felt uncomfortable around Liz. She became more demanding again, although she continued to claim that she was fine with their no-commitment relationship. Every time Dave fought with Liz and ended his relationship with her, Carrie increasingly texted, "We were both victimized. Dave and I had something in common that we didn't have with anyone else," says Liz. Common problems brought the young people closer together, and they returned to each other again and again. In January 2013, Dave discovered the missing Carrie's car in his front yard. Surprisingly, the fingerprints on the steering wheel did not belong to Carrie, and in general, the car was clean. No suspicious traces were found in it. The police later turned the car over to Farver's parents. Carrie continued to write to Liz and Dave. It got to the point where she started sending pictures of their children and threatening to hurt them if Dave didn't leave Liz alone. Time passed, but there were no results. Carrie's manic stalking continued, and Liz annoyed Dave more and more with her jealousy as he continued to socialize with other women. He grew tired of what was going on in his life and finally found the strength to finally end his relationship with Liz. Soon after, another tragedy occurred. In August 2013, Liz Golar reported a fire in her home that killed all of her pets, including a snake, a cat, and 2 dogs. Liz told police she suspected Carrie was responsible for what happened. The woman had threatened her repeatedly in her texts and emails. The incident marked a turning point in the case of the missing Carrie. Carrie Farver was put on a federal wanted list, and each of the tens of thousands of messages was decided to be studied in detail. Law enforcement seized cell phones from Dave and Liz. Krupa believed he was in danger too, so he bought a gun for protection. There was a reason for that. Someone vandalized the auto repair shop where he worked and threw a brick through his window. Carrie seemed to direct his anger at anyone in Dave's life. After a while, the mother of his children, Amy Flora, also began receiving threatening messages from Carrie. Since the man often spent time with his children, he often saw Amy as well. Police became suspicious. Why would a man who had dated Dave for less than 2 weeks for 3 years now stalk him and his ex-girlfriends? It just didn't make any sense. Carrie Farver's relatives were also relentless, searching for the missing woman, plugging in every way they could to find her. And one day, in the spring of 2015, the efforts paid off. Detectives Ryan Avis and Jim Doty volunteered to solve Carrie Farver's disappearance. They found no evidence that Carrie was alive. Here's what one of them told ABC News. "It's not normal for adults to just pick up and leave without literally spending any money. No one saw her and no one heard her voice. It just doesn't make sense. She had a good income, a nice house. I've come to the conclusion that I can't prove that she's actually alive." With the help of Anthony Kawa, digital forensics administrator for the Potawatomi County Sheriff's Office, detectives reviewed content downloaded from Krupp and Golar's phones in 2013. Kawa said Carrie Farver sent more than 50,000 texts and 15,000 emails to Dave over a 3-year period. Kawa added, "Whoever was impersonating Carrie, that certain someone became more and more sophisticated in what they were doing, trying to hide their IP address, trying to hide their real identity. Somebody obviously knew what they were doing, knew all kinds of computer programs, at least had access to them." In December 2015, Liz Golar contacted the police again. She reported that she had been shot in the leg on the doorstep of her own home. According to her, it was not Carrie, but Amy Flora. She was the one she recognized as her attacker. Dave was also missing a gun that Amy may have had access to. Could this woman be behind Carrie's disappearance? There was a lead in the investigation. It explained why everyone connected to Dave Krupp was being harassed. It could well be that Amy, having failed to settle her personal life after the breakup with the father of her children, decided to take revenge in this way and eliminate all competitors. Especially since the relationship between Dave and Amy has always been not bad, the joint children brought them closer together, and foreign women clearly prevented them from getting back together. It didn't take long for the police to respond. Amy was questioned. However, to everyone's surprise, she had an alibi. She had not been at Liz's house at the time of the shooting. This was confirmed by several people, so no arrest was made. The investigation became more and more confusing. At the same time, new details became known from the specialists who were processing data from Liz's cell phone. Golar's phone contained a wealth of information. Kava discovered fake email addresses with different variations of Farver's name. Investigators also discovered an app she used to schedule messages to be sent at certain times. This could explain how she and Dave were receiving messages from Carrie at the same time. Kava became suspicious of Liz Golar. The puzzle came together when Liz's fingerprints were compared to those found on the steering wheel of Carrie's car. They were a perfect match. It became obvious who the culprit was. The killer had been around all these years, and there was no telling who else might have been affected by her actions. One thing was clear. The case had to be stopped as soon as possible. The only thing left to do was not to scare Liz away, or better yet, catch her red-handed. Something had to be done to throw the woman off balance. The detectives decided to make up a story about supposedly believing Liz, with Amy still being the prime suspect. Liz took the bait. She was overjoyed that she would finally be able to get rid of another rival that was interfering with her happiness with Dave. Shortly afterward, Liz Golar handed the police an email that she claimed was from Amy. In that email, Amy admitted to kidnapping Carrie. It also contained details of the crime. The confession stated that Carrie had been stabbed earlier in the stomach or chest area and then disposed of the body. Details from the letter also contained information about Carrie's car and home, which were not made public. The details were chilling because they were graphic, an investigative spokeswoman said. Liz provided detectives with the kind of information that only a true criminal could possess. Thus, she inadvertently confessed to the murder of Carrie Farver. It was clear from the letter that the crime had taken place in the car. Therefore, it was decided to examine the victim's car once again. After the specialists removed the seat covers and fabric, a bloodstain belonging to the disappeared Carrie Farver was found. How did Liz manage to poison messages on Carrie's behalf and yet remain above suspicion? Some sources claim that Liz Golar led a double life, dating both Dave and a man named Garrett. The latter lived on an IP address that was identified as the starting point of messages coming from Carrie's name. In the course of communicating with him, it was revealed that he had been dating Shanna Golar, whom many knew as Liz, for a long time. Out of kindness, the man offered Shanna to move in with his children after the fire. However, the relationship between the two was complicated and deteriorated markedly after they began living together. Garrett would look after Golar's children while she secluded herself in her room or went somewhere else. It came as a big revelation to the man what police told him. Golar spent 40 to 50 hours a week pretending to be the missing woman. Her room was a mess, but no significant evidence was found. However, investigators did find several cell phones and electronics in the last apartment she occupied. In late December 2016, Shanna Golar was charged with first-degree murder. The county prosecutor spoke about the complexity of the court investigation. Most murders are dark. This crime was bizarre to the point where it would take some convincing to make someone believe it actually happened. There's no way someone would have let their dog die in a fire they set themselves. There's no way someone would have shot themselves in the thigh, yet Shanna Golar did it in order to deflect suspicion from herself. Shanna Golar's attorney, James Martin Davis, hoped the case would fall apart because it relied mostly on circumstantial evidence. Carrie's body was never found, nor was the crime weapon, and Golar herself never confessed. There was no evidence that Carrie had died at all. The defense team opted for a mistrial, meaning that the degree of Shanna's guilt would be determined by a judge, not a jury. Mountains of complex electronic evidence were presented along with physical evidence. However, the prosecution insisted that the amount of blood found on the passenger seat of Carrie's car was consistent with a confession of stabbing from the IP address where Shanna lived. Investigators did establish Shanna's direct link to Carrie's murder by analyzing the memory card she was using around the time Carrie went missing. It was in a tablet that was stored in Dave's possession. Deleted images were recovered, including a photo of a human foot with a Chinese symbol tattooed on it. It was immediately obvious that the foot belonged to a man who had been dead for many years. In addition, among Carrie's special features was a similar tattoo. Later, the woman's mother confirmed that the tattoo really belongs to her daughter. The photo confirmed Shanna Golar's conviction. The judge found her guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He said, "Carrie Farver did not disappear voluntarily. It is very unfortunate that she was murdered." Authorities believe Shanna killed Carrie, gave her body time to decompose, and then burned the remains to get rid of all evidence. Probably overstepping her bounds due to jealousy, she decided to get rid of her rival. After disposing of her, she purposely took her cell phone to make Farver look crazy and win back Dave's favor. When her plan succeeded, Shanna wanted to rid her lover of Amy as well. But she got so caught up in the game that she ended up falling into a trap of her own making. It's a bloody love square, to say the least. Golar was also found guilty of setting fire to her own home in August 2013, which she tried so hard to blame on Carrie. Because the fire not only burned down the house but also killed pets, she received an additional 20 years in prison. The woman is currently incarcerated at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. Shanna still maintains her innocence. Dave admitted that he has received thousands of emails and text messages signed by Carrie over the years. However, he never noticed her stalking him when they were together, which cannot be said for Shanna. He also added, "I want her to leave and not do this to anyone else." Justice has been served. For a long time, Carrie Farver's name was on everyone's lips. She was innocently accused of stalking people as well as burning Shanna's house down. Now Carrie herself has been recognized as a victim, and her good name has been restored. Carrie's mother wanted her daughter to be remembered as the fun, smart, talented woman she was. So what became of Carrie's son, Maxwell Farver of Macedonia? According to his LinkedIn page profile, he followed in his mother's footsteps by becoming a computer programmer. He graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in software engineering, data science, and got married. It's unlikely he was able to forget what happened, but he may have found peace in the family he created. Because of his past, Dave Krupa has now chosen to live away from the limelight. In fact, he doesn't even have a public account on any social media platform. The chilling crime story is a brutal reminder of the tangled complexities that can arise in human relationships, of all kinds of manipulation, sometimes going to extremes just to maintain control of the situation. It is a story about how defenseless we can be in our familiar surroundings without knowing the true nature of human beings. Did you know that 1 in 8 people on Earth suffer from a mental health disorder? According to statistics, there were almost 1 billion people with mental health disorders in 2019. Such diseases lead to unemployment, disability, and crime. Among them, 2 groups are distinguished. The first includes serious mental health disorders such as schizophrenia, hallucinations, psychoses, and borderline conditions. The second category is represented by neurotics and psychopaths, aggressive and demonstrative personalities. Sometimes people are unaware of their diagnosis for decades. Some of them live a normal life without causing harm to others. Therefore, the clinical diagnosis of psychopath is not made today. The disease is called otherwise character disorder or antisocial personality disorder. Of course, not all psychopaths are violent criminals, but many of them pose a threat to the well-being of another person. For example, his or her self-esteem, mental balance, or finances. Nevertheless, there are some people who are so rude and out of control that they have to serve serious sentences for the crime they committed or be hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. The story in question happened to Nicola Edgington, a British citizen. Amazingly, a young woman suffering from mental illness has repeatedly asked the relevant authorities, including the police, to pay attention to her condition so that she did not make trouble. And what came out of it you will learn further. On October 10, 2011, an egregious incident occurred in Bexley Heath in the southeast of England. In the early hours of the morning, 2 women were attacked on a street in the town. The first victim was Carrie Clark, a 22-year-old artist. The girl was standing at a bus stop waiting for transportation. Without a hint of danger, was listening to music. At that time, she was approached by an unfamiliar woman in her 30s. Without further ado, she jumped on Carrie and stabbed her. Carrie fell to the ground in surprise. The attacker rushed at her, but the girl's reaction was faster. She grabbed the knife with her hand before the weapon reached her chest. The unconditional reflexes to survive were stronger than the situation. The victim even managed to push her abuser away. Carrie intercepted the knife, despite the pain from the blade, and began to scream. She called for help. At the same time, the girl asked her attacker what she was doing and if her head was all right, to which the woman replied that the only person with a knife in her hand on this street was Carrie herself. In addition, she demanded that she hand over the knife, which the resourceful Carrie certainly did not do. The atmosphere, as well as the conversation that took place between them, puzzled the intruder, and she fled to the other side of the street. However, the matter did not end there. While passers-by rushed to the victim, the criminal disappeared from sight. It turns out that she went into a butcher shop where she stole a knife. Then she noticed another woman standing with her back to her. Without thinking twice, she rushed towards her. The attack on 58-year-old Sally Hodkin was fierce and ruthless, striking her in the neck. The attacker practically decapitated the poor elderly woman. Before she knew it, she fell to the ground and died. The perpetrator fled the scene as quickly as she had appeared. Perhaps the accidents would have continued further if not for the arrival of the police. They managed to track down the inadequate woman through CCTV cameras. A short while later, she was arrested in one of the nearby stores. At the time of her arrest, she appeared unperturbed. The law enforcement officers got the impression that she was even happy to be caught. The detainee was taken to the station where she was identified. The attacker turned out to be 31-year-old Nicola Edgington, who suffers from a mental health disorder. The woman has been admitted to an institution to deal with her acute condition. Meanwhile, detectives have launched an investigation into the case. Nicola was born on September 9, 1980, to Marion and Harry Edgington. She was the eldest among the other children, brother Tom and sister Sarah. The married couple was famous in certain circles. The father of the family was a respected foreign correspondent for the Daily Mail, a British daily newspaper. His wife was just like him, educated and charming. Tom and Sarah were quiet and obedient children. They did not cause much trouble to their parents. That could not be said of Nicola. The girl was a difficult child from an early age. Despite her angelic appearance, she possessed a devilish character. At school, she insulted her classmates, often hitting them. She studied badly and was insolent to her teachers. In addition, at home, Nicola provoked quarrels between parents. Eventually, conflicts and tension led to divorce Edgingtons. Harry moved to France, but continued to keep in touch with his children. Marion was concerned about her daughter's behavior. She repeatedly showed her to a psychologist and conducted various kinds of examinations. However, they did not give the proper result. Everything was written off on the peculiarities of the girl's character. Many years later, her brother Tom said that her sister just knew how to pretend to be normal. After the dissolution of the marriage, relations with her mother became strained. In addition, the girl had grown up. By her early teens, she had become completely uncontrollable. The young lady allowed herself to be absent from home for days at a time. Due to this, Marion repeatedly contacted the police. Once, Nicola called the social service with a request to place her in a care center. The girl complained about her mother. It is not known exactly whether she really needed help or did it out of spite. However, her wish was heard. As protective measures until the circumstances are clarified, the girl was taken away from home and placed in a specialized institution. However, there the young lady showed herself in all her glory, after which she was returned home. The social worker stated that she was a danger to other children. When Nicola returned home, her behavior only worsened. She started drinking and smoking and got involved with bad company. For this reason, Marion and her children were forced to move to Forest Row in East Sussex. The woman dreamed of starting a new life where no one knew them. In the new place, Nicola began to study in a state comprehensive school, while Tom and Sarah went to live in a boarding school. Tom later recalled that he understood his mother's circumstances. Moreover, he enjoyed life away from his inadequate sister. He realized that Nicola's behavior was destructive to the psyche and well-being of the family. Consequently, on weekends, Tom did not even want to return home. When Nicola was 15 years old, she dropped out of school. The girl did not accept her mother's request to finish her studies. She believed that she could do without education. In addition, she stopped perceiving the words of Marion. From this, their relationship became even more complicated, sometimes violent. One day, Nicola hit her mother with a cell phone. This gave the woman a black eye. The incident was reported to the police. However, Nicola only received a warning that it was unacceptable. In the end, it was decided to separate. Nicola was probably the initiator, as she had long wanted to get away from her mother's hyperparenting. Nicola settled on the south coast of England in Brighton. Rent an apartment helped her father, about whom, by the way, she spoke negatively, claiming that more than once she was abused by him. However, Mr. Edgington denied these allegations. For a short time, Nicola managed to work as a hairdresser, a sales clerk, but nowhere for a long time. Some sources claim she also made a living as a stripper. Leading a free lifestyle at the age of 17, Nicola suspected she was pregnant. A medical examination confirmed it. The doctor informed Nicola of the impending birth of twins. However, the babies were not destined to be born, as Nicola's boyfriend punched her in the stomach. At the age of 19, she got pregnant again. This time, the father of the baby was another boyfriend who was involved in the trafficking of illegal drugs. By then, Miss Edgington was also using drugs, which triggered the birth of the baby 3 months premature. Nevertheless, the boy was brought out, and Marion helped to care for him. Once out of work, Nicola continued to lead a binge lifestyle and use illegal substances. Because of this, she came under the supervision of the relevant doctors. It would seem that Nicola's life should have continued in a similar vein, but suddenly, there was a bright streak. She met a guy from Jamaica in a nightclub. He turned out to be a nice man. Subsequently, the young people got married. Another child was born in the marriage. The identity of the Jamaican is not disclosed, but it is known for sure that the period of their relationship was favorable. The man was an excellent father. He loved not only his son, but also his stepson. He was also a decent spouse. He took care of his wife, making sure she took the medication prescribed by her doctor. The medication regulated her mood, and thanks to it, Nicola became relatively calm. After a while, the woman embraced religion and joined the controversial Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. There she was persuaded that everything was the will of the Almighty, not man-made medicines. So she stopped taking them, which worsened Nicola's condition. Among other things, she was brainwashed. Poor mental health and self-injury played a cruel trick on the young woman. She began to claim that she could see demons and people disappearing into the kingdom of God. She also believed that there was a 100-eyed monster on earth that guarded the throne of God from enemies and took the form of a police force. Later, one of the doctors said that the patient confessed to him that she thought God had supposedly left her, taken everyone else, and abandoned her. Nicola was saddened by this, as according to her she loved and believed in him very much. She also saw storefronts as if they had experienced an apocalypse. In other words, she was talking religious nonsense and apparently catching hallucinations from time to time. At this time, presumably because of migration problems, her husband was forced to return to his home country. Seeing his wife's condition, he took the children with him. However, after a while, Nicola persuaded him to give up the eldest child, motivated by the fact that he is not his own father. Although the former spouse was concerned about her health, he still had to give the child to his mother. Apparently, he hoped that the grandmother would join the upbringing of the boy. Back home, Nicola became even more aggressive and violent. Marion worried for her grandson's safety. However, the daughter limited her mother's involvement in her son's life. Eventually, at the age of 5, the child was handed over to social services. As it later turned out, he returned to the custody of his stepfather in Jamaica. Consequently, all government benefits, including welfare and living in a city council-funded apartment, were canceled for the woman. She had to return to her parents' home. Her mother, although afraid of her daughter's actions, did not deny her shelter. There, their relationship deteriorated further. Once Nicola threatened their neighbor with a knife and damaged his property. The police limited themselves to issuing a warning the second time. At the same time, she was examined by a doctor who found no signs of mental disorder. During the investigation into the murder of Sally Hodkin and the attack on Carrie Clark, it was discovered that Nicola Edgington had already committed crimes in the past. However, she was rehabilitated a short time later and was living at large under specialist care. What turned out to be appalling was that the woman had committed a crime against a close family member, and in all likelihood, did not fully realize what had happened. It was November 4th, 2005, when the entire Edgington family met for the first time in a long time. Only Harry, the father of the family, was absent. Tom and Sarah decided to visit her mother, and in order not to create obstacles in communication between his daughter and her mother, Tom decided to distract Nicola. He invited her to the local pub. Initially, their communication did not build, but after a while, Nicola said that she would soon move to London. At the same time, she was writing something down in a notebook. When Tom asked her what she was writing, her sister didn't answer, only smiled enigmatically. Afterwards, Nicola got into an argument with a member of the venue's staff, resulting in her being kicked out. Tom wanted to continue the evening on a good note, so he called his mother and suggested that she and Sarah join him. Marion declined, and the younger sister decided to keep her brother company. If they had known then how the evening would end, they would never have left their mother alone with Nicola. Back in the house, Tom noticed a strange clutter on the cot his mother had put in the guest room. It looked like a pile of clothes with someone's legs sticking out from underneath. Tom didn't realize what he was seeing. The man figured someone had spent the night at his mother's house. He reported it to Sarah. However, she decided to see if it was true, and she was right. Sarah's deafening shout of calling the police came from the room. In fact, the legs Tom saw belonged to 60-year-old Marion. The woman was dead, and stab wounds were visible on her body. In addition, there was no older sister in the house. The family suspected that she might have been involved in the crime. Their assumptions were confirmed when, searching the house for Nicola, Tom found a familiar notebook. On the first page, a list of names was written in her handwriting under the general title, "Doomed to Death." First on the list was Marion's name, which had been crossed off. After arriving at the crime scene, forensic investigators began examining the victim's body. They found 9 stab wounds and penetrating wounds inflicted with a kitchen knife. Later, a version was put forward that the crime occurred during a conflict between women. At the same time, a search for the missing woman was underway. Sarah made a plea on television for Nicola to return home. On November 21, 2005, Nicola Edgington was detained on her way to London. The first thing she underwent was a psychiatric evaluation. Nicola was found to be in an emotionally unstable state. She spent some time in prison before being transferred to the Bracton Center in February 2006. This facility was for people with mental health problems who had committed a crime. Specialists at the center determined that the woman could not stand trial until her health condition improved. 8 months later, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility. The psychiatrist's report stated schizophrenia and emotionally unstable personality traits. The doctor who observed the patient opined that she needed inpatient treatment for further behavioral risk assessment and long-term rehabilitation. Ultimately, the judge, under the Mental Health Act 1983, sentenced the defendant to be detained in a psychiatric clinic indefinitely. At the clinic, the young woman was treated with antipsychotic medication to stabilize her emotional background. However, Nicola's behavior was disturbing. It was abusive and defiant. The patient did not want to remember the crime she had committed and was looking forward to being discharged as soon as possible. In addition, she showed an increased interest in the male patients of the center. Despite this, in November 2007, the medical commission decided to transfer the woman to another room where the patients could lead a freer life. It is unlikely that this move was related to the improvement of her condition. Rather, it was probably done to free up bed space. In the new ward, the medication doses were reduced, which had a negative effect. In addition, the mentally ill person had an affair, which also affected her mood. Despite these circumstances, the heroine of the story was discharged on September 29, 2009. Nicola began to live in a subsidized apartment provided by the state in such cases. A woman who could have fallen off the wagon at any time was not left to fend for herself. She was assigned to the so-called Interagency Public Protection System. It brings together several agencies whose responsibility it is to ensure the safety of citizens from criminals who are released to live in the community. At the same time, Mrs. Edgington expressed concern about being alone at night. However, she was assured that she was supervised around the clock. In addition, there was a contingency and assistance plan in place. Nicola lived in these conditions for 2 years. She was visited periodically by a psychiatrist and a social worker. In turn, she was assessed as necessary. Surprisingly, during this time, she was allowed to travel to her ex-husband's home to visit her children. In 2011, she was in a relationship with 2 men living in the home in question. They were also under supervision, so communication between them was prohibited. However, they violated the prohibition. Consequently, in March, the highly anticipated event occurred. Nicola became pregnant again. In order to carry the baby and deliver it healthy, she was taken off her medication. After a while, the pregnancy broke down, however. The ward did not resume treatment. In September 2011, the woman decided to contact her brother. She sent him a message on Facebook, telling him that she repented for killing her mother. Nicola wrote that she missed his support and that no one cared for her as much as Marion did. Nicola also reported a failed pregnancy. She left him her phone number and asked him not to tell their father about the correspondence. Tom's response was brutal. Her brother couldn't forgive her. He wrote that she was a cold-blooded criminal who had forced him to discover the body of a loved one, something he would never forget. Lastly, Tom added that the news of the failed pregnancy made him happy. Moll, people like his older sister, should not reproduce, and all she has to do now is to voluntarily pass away after doing a favor to others. After that, on October 6th, 7 and 9, Nicola had a nervous breakdown. During this time, she repeatedly called the police, reporting that she was receiving death threats. The police responded to the call, however, did not find anything suspicious. After that, they stopped paying attention to her calls. In September 2011, the woman decided to contact her brother. She sent him a message on Facebook, telling him that she repented for killing her mother. Nicola wrote that she missed his support and that no one cared for her as much as Marion did. Nicola also reported a failed pregnancy. She left him her phone number and asked him not to tell their father about the correspondence. Tom's response was brutal. Her brother couldn't forgive her. He wrote that she was a cold-blooded criminal who had forced him to discover the body of a loved one, something he would never forget. Lastly, Tom added that the news of the failed pregnancy made him happy. Moll, people like his older sister, should not reproduce, and all she has to do now is to voluntarily pass away after doing a favor to others. After that, on October 6th, 7 and 9, Nicola had a nervous breakdown. During this time, she repeatedly called the police, reporting that she was receiving death threats. The police responded to the call, however, did not find anything suspicious. After that, they stopped paying attention to her calls. Nicola sought comfort. She tried to seek help from the specialist assigned to her. However, she was unable to do so because the office was closed at weekends. She turned to her faith again, but this did not help her either. Nicola's condition worsened. On October 10, 2011, the climax came. At 3 in the morning, the woman called a cab and asked to be taken to Lewis Hospital. When she arrived, for some reason, she told the driver that the clinic was closed and asked to return home. By the way, the treatment facility was open, but Nicola's condition alerted the driver. After a while, she started talking about being sick and needing treatment. In addition, she had not paid for the road, so around 4:30 a.m., the cab driver decided to report what was happening to the police. A patrol car picked up Nicola and took her to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. There she said she wanted to leave because she didn't feel safe. However, the officers left her there alone and drove away. Nicola tried to calm herself down by starting to call everyone who could help her. First, she dialed her district nurse. As it later turned out, the nurse did not answer as she was ill. Mrs. Edgington also wrote to her social worker, tried to call the Bracton Center, but was unsuccessful, either by the law of meanness or because it was early morning and everyone was asleep. After a while, she asked the receptionist if the doctor would be in soon, to which she replied that it would have to wait a little longer. Nicola got angry and blurted out, "Do I have to kill someone to get attention?" The staff member again asked her to be patient. No one seemed to care about the woman's condition. Nicola therefore called the emergency number and asked for the police to be sent to her. The woman said that she had previously killed a man in a similar condition and needed help again. The dispatcher assured her that he would send some officers soon. In the end, no one arrived. She dialed a familiar number again and asked to be arrested while she hurt someone. Nicola repeated that she had schizophrenia and was having another attack. The police asked her where she was. She gave the address of the hospital. Then they called the clinic. The nurse assured the police that Nicola was under control. At 5:30 a.m., she was finally seen by a nurse. After another hour, Nicola was escorted to the hospital's psychiatric ward. At 6:40 a.m., the doctor on duty came to see Nicola. But he made a mistake by leaving her alone in the ward and not checking the door behind him. After 7 a.m., the woman got tired of waiting. She pushed the front door, which turned out to be open because of a broken mechanism. This is how Nicola managed to escape. Upon returning, the doctor realized that the patient was missing and reported it to the police. It was only at this point that Nicola was checked through the databases. They became aware that all this time, they had been communicating with a man who once took the life of his mother. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Nicola was out of control and attacked two unfortunate women who fell into her hands. CCTV cameras later showed Nicola's route of travel. She boarded public transport and arrived in the city center at around 8:25 a.m. After getting off the bus, the unstable woman went to a supermarket where she stole a kitchen knife. What happened later is already known. Nicola Edgington appeared in court in early 2013. The woman pleaded not guilty to charges of murder and attempted murder. The parties were divided. Several psychiatrists spoke at the trial. A defense witness, Dr. Adrian Cree, told the court about Mrs. Edgington's strange statement. When he assessed her in 2005, he said the defendant believed that her boyfriend, whom she had dated for 2 years, was actually the father of her first child. Allegedly, he returned to the UK and changed his style of dress as well as his appearance. He then started a relationship with her for a second time, introducing himself as Philip. The psychiatrist added that he was convinced that Nicola was a paranoid schizophrenic. According to the prosecution, the prevailing diagnosis of the defendant was still borderline personality disorder with rational ability. Her actions on the unfortunate day were consistent and deliberate. The prosecutor referred to a recent medical report. It indicated that there was no need for inpatient treatment for Mrs. Edgington. However, according to the defense, the woman was clearly suffering from schizophrenia and other mental problems. Therefore, her responsibility at the time of the crime was reduced. The defense lawyers reported that Nicola's condition is very serious. In turn, Nicola said that sometimes she feels like she is caught in a computer game, and the only way to keep herself safe is to be with the police. Allegedly, she has formed a belief that if she commits theft, she will be caught. She also admitted that she doesn't remember the period of time between going to the store and being arrested. She admitted to the stabbing, but pleaded diminished responsibility due to her mental state. On February 7, 2013, a jury found Nicola Edgington guilty of the charges against her. On March 4th, Judge Brian Barker sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 37 years, the minimum sentence. He exposed the woman as a skillful manipulator who made a choice, for which she will be held accountable to the full extent of the law for the rest of her life. Do you think Nicola received sufficient punishment for her actions? Or did some representatives of the special services treat her condition negligently enough, thus provoking the crime?